started to reveal a hole, the twins in fact, a place that he knew and hated. And the hole was filled with fighting men. Men in Stark and Tully livery were desperately fighting with knives against Freys armed with swords. An ambush. What was happening? He looked around wildly and then his blood ran cold. Edmure was on the floor, his chest rising and falling but his forehead covered in blood. And he was there. Himself. He had killed one Free with what looked like a spoon through the eye and was laying about him with a sword, before glancing back at the dais, snarling and then cutting a way out of the nearest door. He looked at the dais as well. Two red-headed bodies were lying in front of it. He froze in horror. Cat. It was Cat. And next to him, was that Robb. He looked older and wearier even in death. Bearded as well. There was a thin cold-eyed man next to him with a dripping knife and on the dais Walder Free was cackling with glee. What happened here? Treachery and foolishness. All for naught. They all died anyway. The wolf's bloods are persistent. But that is not why we show you this. This was the moment that we acted. Acted. This is a future that will not now happen. A future that we diverted. We took the mind of Robert Stark from the moment of his death and took it back through time. He stared at the body, stunned. To when the hole faded from view and a room appeared, smaller and with a bed. And then suddenly the figure under the blankets woke with a scream, before looking about wildly. It was Robb Stark again, but younger and unbearded. To now. Some months back. He remembers what went wrong and has been working with his father. Truths have been shown to him, to them both. They know about the others. They sent out the call. You will need to talk to them. They will need help. Help. With what? With those who will not listen. The first men are awakening, but we still stand on the blade of a sword. Things can still go wrong. The hearts of men are hard to predict at times, stubbornness and stupidity can still rule at times. And this must be avoided. Blackness fell again and when it lifted he realized that he was on the walls of Riverrun. But it was a Riverrun that was different. The air was cold and snowflakes drifted through the air. Men were working on the walls here and there, repairing damage and there was the smell of smoke in the air. And then he saw the two figures looking out over the ramparts. Himself again, only older and infinitely wearier. He was dressed in leather armor, but had a necklace of small antlers around his neck, with a wicked-looking mace in his belt. And Robert Baratheon was next to him. The king looked older as well and a lot thinner. Still powerful, but there was a haunted look in his eyes. He stepped up to them to see at what they were looking at and saw a small boat drifting sluggishly through the water, its way blocked now and then by chunks of ice. There was a body in it, judging by the fire that was engulfing it. A funeral boat. I always wondered why we burnt our dead. The older version of him spat bitterly. Now I know. A holdover from the old days of the first men, the king rumbled. A good thing. Otherwise we'd have whites in your crypts. He sighed. So much for going north. It would be a death sentence. I've lost enough men as it is and then had to kill those who came back. He patted his sword and Brynden started slightly. What was that thing? It was huge and old. And so very deadly. A rider came, the older him said eventually. News from the west. It's true. All of it. The king sighed. I feared it was so. Damn that bloody man. Lannisters. He spat the word with hate. Fools, the lot of them. Especially Tywin. He wouldn't believe. Tyrion Lannister is no fool and he believes. He has to. He leads the last of them south. What's left of them? The Westerlands are gone. The north is besieged. Winterfell might be holding out, but Ned's last raven said that the Night's King himself was outside the walls. And the Iron Islands are best not talked about. Any word from anywhere else? Nay. And the new Maester, well, we'll need new ravens. Who would have thought that your old Maester would go so mad? Others will come. Although the ones from the twins, well, we know what happened there. Boots scuffed to one side and a tired-looking young man walked towards them with a sack in one hand and bowed formally. Your Grace. Lord Tully. The lad looked familiar, like a younger version of the king, with a shock of black hair and very blue eyes. A bastard son perhaps. I spotted a white that looked familiar. And he opened the sack and pulled out a severed head with blue eyes that opened and closed and a mouth that also moved. Brindon stared at it in horror. A white. Wait. The older version of him and the king both peered at the head and then burst into laughter. The late Lord Free. The other him chuckled and then shook his head. He begged for help in his messages. And now here he is. So much for the phrase. He pointed to one side. Put it down please lad. I'll see to this one. The lad did as he was told and was about to move off when the king held up a hand. Gendry. Your Grace. The king paused for a long moment. You've done me proud these past few weeks. Shown your mettle like few others. Time it was rewarded. I don't know how long we've got here. I don't know if we can break out south and survive. But whatever we do I want you at my side as my son. You're Gendry Baratheon from this day forwards. I'll proclaim it. The young man bowed his head for a long moment and then looked up with tears shining in his eyes. Thank you your grace. I mean father. The king laid a large hand on his shoulder and smiled at him. Off you go lad. As he went then the two of them looked back at the severed head. And then the older version of him pulled out the mace, hefted it thoughtfully and then brought it down on the head of Walder Free savagely. And the darkness fell again. This must be avoided. This future holds no hope. You must work against it, you and Brian of Tarth. Why me? Why her? You are both needed. You are both honorable in ways that many do not understand but also clear-sighted. You see the fundamental truths that many deny. You both have your blind spots, but between you, you are one. You will need her and she will need you to keep to the proper path. The world rests on this, Brindon Tully, the Blackfish. You are needed. He thought long and hard. What would this make me? A green man. Something like that. The green men will be tending the groves again, they will have their duties. They will walk the roads and forests again, as it was before. You and Brian of Tarth will have other duties. You must convince other men. Even men as stubborn as your nephew and the old lion of Casterly Rock, who must avoid the fate that overtook him in that future we showed you, that of a stumbling wight in the blood-soaked halls of his ancestors. He nodded slowly. Very well. I will do this. What choice do I have? None. And then pain annihilated his world as red fire enveloped him for a long instant. When he opened his eyes again he was sprawled at the foot of the tree. Brian of Tarth was next to him and as she opened her own eyes and groaned he saw red fire in them for an instant. Chapter 16. Chapter text. Brian. The darkness smothered her and she clawed at it for a moment. And then it lifted. She was standing at the edge of a forest, with statues in front of her. Statues of men and the odd women dressed in archaic clothing. Old armor. Furs in places. She looked about, confused. Where was this place? The statues stood on flagstones and, wait, there were others here. She could see a man with shoulder-length hair talking to an old man. And then suddenly the old man vanished like smoke in the wind. She blinked and then she saw the green fire in the eyes of the statues. All the statues. Stark talked to Stark. You stand in the presence of the old gods and the ancestors of the Starks, a voice seemed to say, a voice that she seemed to both feel and hear. The blood of the first men is still strong on Tarth. Still strong in you. And you must be strong. As strong as you were in a future that will not come to pass. And then the darkness took her again and she fell. When it lifted again she was standing in a tent. A figure was standing to one side with its back to her as various pieces of green armor were piled to one side. And then her breath caught as a man stepped into the tent. It was Renly Baratheon. The man who had danced with her on Tarth, the man who had treated her with politeness that few others ever had, until she met the Blackfish. She peered at him shyly. He was a comely man, handsome. Not as tall as his brother the king and, wait. As she came to look at him she could see something in his eyes that made her pause. There was an emptiness there. A look of a man trapped by events. She could tell by the sounds from outside the tent that something terrible was happening here, something huge. The preparations before a battle perhaps. And the ground seemed to shake under her feet, because the other person in the tent turned around and it was her. She was in armor as well, good armor too. She held a green breastplate in her hands and helped Renly Baratheon to don it, moving carefully with the straps. The wind blew in through the flaps of the tent and despite herself she shivered. What was this? Why was she being shown this? And then, something black and terrible came through the very shadows at the base of the tent. Something evil. She could sense how wrong it was even as she caught sight of it out of the corner of her eyes. She opened her mouth to call out, to warn that other version of her, who was also reacting, but it was too late. A black tendril, like smoke but somehow sharper looking than Valyrian steel, slashed out at Renly and suddenly there was blood everywhere. It gushed from his neck to his hip and she stared in horror, before giving a wail of grief as he fell first to his knees and then onto his side, his mouth opening and closing. She wanted to fall to her knees, to weep, to help that other version of her, who was desperately trying to tend to a dying man. Why show me this, she sobbed. Why? To show you that magic is real. Magic is deadly. This was the work of a shadowbender of Asai. This was magic used for evil, in a future that will not now happen. Renly Baratheon's death was an empty one in this world, part of a tide of death that we avoided. She looked up at this, away from the now frozen tableau of death in front of her. This will not happen. No. This was a world that went wrong, a world where the call was never sent out, a world where death marched on the wall and no one cared about it in the south. We acted to change this. The scene changed again to a room in which a young man slept in a bed. He had red hair and from the vague memories she had of something her father had said once, he looked like a Tully. She found herself shaking less from shock all of a sudden and wondered just how she was seeing this. Was this like a dream? Had her ancestors had such visions? This is Robb Stark of Winterfell. The Starks are the key to everything. King of Winter of old, their blood was used to build the spells that made the wall. In that other future he died. Here he lives. We brought him back in time. The young man came awake with a shudder and a scream, his hands going to his chest and then looking down at his bare skin in confusion, before staring around the room in total confusion. I was at the twins, he muttered. I died. She stared at Robb Stark in awe. You brought him back from the moment of his death. Then, you are indeed gods. Did the Starks send out the call? Did Robb Stark? His father did. An ancient artifact owned by his ancestors did it. The Starks know the threat now, as does the North. And those with the blood of the first men. You heard it. She had heard it. It still rang within her. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Tarth awakens then. But much remains to be done. There is another future that must be avoided. More blackness and then she was standing at the top of a tower. There were 4 grim-faced figures there and again, some other version of her was one of them. She stared at that other version of her. Her hair was a little longer, but not overly so, and a thin scar marked her cheek. She wore a necklace of small antlers, but it was her eyes that had really changed. They were the eyes of someone who had seen far too much. She'd seen such eyes on the faces of veterans, those who had seen far too much. The other 3, well, judging by the ruined armor, one was Bronze John Royce. Another was Lord Arryn, looking old but still formidable. And the third was a black-haired, black-bearded man in dark leathers, with a nose that looked as if it had broken and then reset at some point. Brian looked over the ramparts and then felt herself paling. A steady stream of men and women were passing down the road to one side. Judging by the sun they were all heading south and they were desperate. She could see that many were gaunt with hunger and many others wounded and that all were armed in some fashion. Even the women were carrying what looked like crude spears, with some kind of stone attached to the tips. This is no longer a war that can be won with the old tactics, Lord Arryn said wearily. The Knights of the Vale are no more. Heavy cavalry cannot charge the endless ranks of the dead. Not without being swarmed over and adding to them. This is a war of the first men now. First men magic and first men tactics. I will return to King's Landing and send supplies. Lord Royce, this is your war now. Lord Castle, I have paid a part of your debt, as you asked. Your service to Hauserin and Westeros remains exemplary. The black-haired man smiled wryly. Thank you, my lord. If I live to see her again, I doubt that she'll ever speak to me again for having her sent away, but given what's at stake, you have my thanks. Lord Arryn nodded in response and then shook his head a little. I would give all the gold in the world to see my son just for an instant. Winterfell holds out, my lord, despite all that the Night King has thrown at its walls, that other version of her said. And Sir Brynden is with the king in Riverrun. Hope remains, though the thread grows thin. Grows thin indeed, with the Westerlands gone. Our western flank is gone and the Martells are panicking. Well, all we can do is fight. Lord Royce, your runes could provide us with the edge we need to delay them at the very least. I pray to the old gods that it will be so, the bearded man in the ruined armor growled. Much has been lost over the centuries, and even we in Runestone do not know if it will be enough. We need more of everything. Valyrian steel, dragon glass, knowledge, and time. All four looked grim at that. Time, the other version of her said with a shake of the head. The one thing we need more of. And then things seemed to shimmer and freeze. She looked around. This future is one that must not come to pass. We brought Robb Stark back in time because there was a war between men, a war that stilled the voices. The voices. The voices of those who worship us. The war stilled too many. As would this future. This is why it cannot happen. It must be stopped. You and Brynden Tully are the ones who must stop it. She stared around again. How? There are those who deny the call. Who deny that the others have awoken again. Who would place their own petty desires and politics over those of this world. They must be persuaded. We stand on the blade of a sword. The slightest thing can tip things one way or another. The Riverlands must be alerted, as must the Westerlands, to the threat that lies ahead. The North must be supported. And I have been chosen for this. Me and Sir Brynden. Why us? You both have a sense of honor and justice that few others have. You both persuade others to find that better part of themselves. You both believe that the world can be better. And in all the futures that we have seen, you keep fighting when others would despair and give up. She felt vaguely proud at that. But she also felt stunned. Very well, she said eventually. What will the cost be? The Green Man will tell you, for it has been his burden for too long. Prepare yourself. How can I prepare myself? But there was no answer. Instead, red fire seemed to fill her eyes and every part of her body. She opened her mouth to scream, and then she was back in front of the great heart tree, on her back and feeling as if the weight of the world had been laid on her for a second. She groaned and opened her eyes and then turned to look for the blackfish. He was next to her and he seemed to be staring in horror at her, and his eyes were filled with red fire, which blazed brightly and then vanished as if snuffed out. There was a long moment of silence and then he croaked, "Your eyes, they were filled with red fire." "So were yours," she replied shakily. "Did the old gods speak to you as well?" "They did. They showed me visions. Of the future. One in which there was a war. Betrayal. Treachery. And another in which, the others were in the Riverlands and had overrun Casterly Rock." Shock roiled through her. "You were in Riverrun, with the king. Winterfell was under siege." He stared back at her. "Yes. You saw it too." "I saw, myself. With others. Lord Royce, I think. Lord Arryn. And someone called Lord Castle. We were discussing the war against the others. I do not think that we were winning." The blackfish stood with a groan and then peered at the Sunday. "Well, several hours have passed. It feels like but a moment, despite all that we saw, but hours have passed." He held out a hand and she reached out and grabbed it as she levered herself up. There was a moment of dizziness and then it passed. "It seems that we have a task to perform," she muttered. "And a future to prevent." "Aye," he replied. "A dark and terrible one too. Those who heard the call but reject it must be persuaded. I feel that I am an odd choice for that, but it seems that we have been chosen together." I asked what the cost would be, she said, as they both made for the path that would lead back to the building where they had started off from. "I was told that the Green Man would tell us." "Aye," he said again. Then his brow furrowed. From his hand, well, he would know about cost. He was badly burnt at one point. His voice though. I have heard it before, or I have met him in passing before at some point. When though? It must have been a long time ago. A very long time ago. It was at that point that she realized something. This is not the same path that we came down. I mean, it goes in the right direction, but these are not the same trees. He peered around. You're right, he said in astonishment. Then he looked down at the ground. Wait, tracks. Someone small has been up and down here. And then frowned. Someone with odd feet. Not enough toes. Odd. They pressed on, and after a while she could see the hole that they had left what now felt like a lifetime ago. There was no one outside it, but as they entered they could see that the green man was still sitting by the fire, staring into it. As they approached he looked up, allowing the hood to shift a little, and Sabrindon stopped dead next to her, staring at the man as the blood drained from his face. You're dead, he muttered eventually. You're supposed to be dead. Everyone said that you died. After Summerhall. The green man smiled bitterly. Oh, I wanted to die after that. He pulled the sleeve back for a moment to reveal the terrible burns on his hand. I failed, you see. I failed to protect them. And not just from the fire. It was her turn to stare. And then she made the connection and felt her eyes widen and her nostrils flare. But, if you are who I think you are, that would make you more than 100. The green man smiled again, this time faintly. Being the green man has its peculiarities. After Summerhall I came here seeking answers. I found them, but not the ones to the questions I was asking. I found bitter truths here. And a measure of peace. As well as something else. The shock was still rattling through her mind, as she thought about the tales she had heard, and the shield that she had found in the armory of Tarth. I am Brian of Tarth. The green man stood slowly, his back crackling as he straightened up. He was at least 6.5 feet tall, but from his slightly crooked back he had once been closer to 7 feet tall. I know, he said with a smile. Hello, great-granddaughter. You have made me so proud. You did not just hear the call, you came to the Isle of Faces. She had no idea what to do, or say, or how to react, but the green man took the decision out of her hands by approaching and hugging her gently. Come, he said as he released her, both of you. Sit. You have been chosen. The old gods are with you. I sense it. They chose me too once. My time is passing. A new time is upon us if we can survive the storm that is upon us. And a black and terrible one it is. You have been shown visions. We have indeed, the blackfish muttered as he sat down by the fire. The others come. We have people to persuade about the threat. The green man agreed. And I have one last fight in me. One last war. The green men will go forth from here for the first time in centuries, to tend the groves of the first men. And the way must be made safe for our allies. She swapped a confused glance with the blackfish. Allies. The green man did not reply, but instead looked up. It was only then that she saw the little figures sitting in the rafters. Figures with green and gold eyes, and some with eyes of moss green or blood red. And both hope and wonder stirred in her heart. Bronn. By the time that the Maester re-emerged from the room in which he'd been sequestered with Lady Bonnelly, Bronn was beyond fretting and well on the way to worrying. The Maester had been in there for the better part of a day or so, with little word other than that he was still trying to save her life, and could someone please send in some new coals for the brazier. That was a bad thing, the brazier. That meant that the Maester was using fire. Which would explain some of the choked screams that had emerged initially from the room, before the dreadful silence had fallen. And now Hayster had finally emerged. His young face was drawn with strain and tiredness and what was probably extreme hunger. Bronn stood as he saw him and then waved at Ursula Stone, who hurried over whilst Harold, the poor bloody fool who had been driving the carriage and who appeared to be permanently terrified, also scurried over. She lives, Hayster said wearily. But her arm was, well, the wound was corrupted, as you know. Very badly corrupted. To save her life I had to take off her arm. Bronn winced. Where, exactly? Hayster sighed. I tried to save her upper arm but failed. I had to amputate just below the shoulder, my lord. Bronn gazed at the maester with no small amount of respect. That was a tricky thing to do and have the person still live. He'd seen very large men lose an arm and then die not long after from one of the very many things that seemed to ail people with wounds at times. Then again he'd also see a small skinny runt of a Northman once lose a leg at the knee to a giant twat from the Iron Isles and somehow survive. Harold had gone white with shock. She lives though? The question was asked in a quavering voice. She lives, but I would be a liar if I said that I could predict if she will see the dawn a week from now or not. The loss of an arm is no easy thing to live through. The infection was deep. Why did you not seek a maester earlier? The Valiman looked shifty. She forbade us from seeking one. She was in a great hurry to get, home. There was a short pause as Bronn looked at the man and raised an eyebrow at Hayster and then at Ursula Stone, who raised an eyebrow of her own back at him for a heartbeat. Then he sighed. Enough was enough. Get home. Come on, lad. We all know who she really is. He paused as Harold stiffened and then reached out like lightning and grabbed the Valiman's hand as it reached towards his dagger. Now don't be a complete idiot. You're a bad enough liar as it is and I've known a lot of liars in my time. She's not Lady Barnley, she's Lysa Arryn. We all know that. The ravens came with her description. See sense, lad. Harold's face worked for a moment and then he seemed to deflate like a toad being stepped upon. Yes, he said eventually. She is Lady Arryn. Who is accused of trying to murder her husband. The Lord Paramount of the Vale, the hand of the king himself, Lord Arryn. The Valiman hung his head in shame. We didn't know that she had done so. She came out of the Red Keep and told us that she had to depart at once. Where to? Bronn asked sharply. The Vale. The Eyrie. She was going to demand the return of her son. That was all she could talk about. That the Stark would have to give him back because of Petta's gift to her. That's what she said. I don't know if it was the fever talking, but that's what she said. Bronn stared at him for a long moment and then looked at Ursula Stone, who was looking as baffled as he felt. What gift? Lady Arryn has a chest. A small one. She had it in the coach with her. She never let it out of her sight, until she became feverish. Then we placed it under her seat. Bronn looked at his steward, who sighed, nodded shortly and then strode off. As she did, Bronn looked back at Harold. You and the others will be our guests until word come from King's Landing. Maester Hayster, please send a raven with the appropriate information on it, about Lady Arryn's arrival and her current condition. Then please return to caring for her. I've no doubt that the king will want her to live to be questioned. The maester nodded and then scurried off. As he did, then Bronn beckoned to a guard, who placed a large gauntleted hand on Harold's shoulder, disarmed him swiftly and then marched him off. Bronn watched them go and then leant against a nearby wall. All of a sudden he was so very tired. Petta fucking Baelish. That repulsive little weasel, whose legacy seemed to be to poison everyone around him who had even the slightest connection to him. Yes, he had profited mightily from catching said weasel. And at least the man was dead. Cutting his head off had been, well, something that he had enjoyed doing, if only because he knew that there was no question that he was dead. Hearing footsteps approaching, he looked up. Ursula Stone was approaching with a small chest, about the length of his forearm, in her hands. This was in the coach, in the place that he mentioned, she said. It seems to be locked though. He took it from her with a murmur of thanks, raised an eyebrow at the lock and then pulled out the small pouch that always hung at his belt. Inside were a few small items that he had always found to be useful. He picked out two of the smaller pieces of metal inside and then started to probe the lock on the small chest, humming as he did so. After a long moment he realized that he was being stared at. Something the matter? Are those lockpicks? Happens that they might be. What if they are? What were you before you became a lord again? My lord. He smiled lazily at her. I was the man who caught Petta Bloody Baelish for Lord Jon Arryn, hand of the king. And before that, well, I was a man of many talents. He felt something give a little in the lock and devoted his full attention to it. After a moment the hasp came free. Opening the chest revealed a number of letters. But it was the one on top that caught his eye because it was the one with a mockingbird seal pressed onto it. A broken seal, come to that. He reached out, picked it up and unfolded it. My dearest Lysa. By the time you hold this I might no longer be in King's Landing. Do not believe the foul lies and untruths that you might hear about me. I am an innocent man, guilty only of trying to do my best to save the realm but being misunderstood most grievously in the process. There is a plot against my life and I have been forced to flee. Do not worry, I will find safety. I have many friends in many places and I shall send word to you. I suspect many people in this plot against me. The first person is your husband. I have discovered a terrible secret that he is hiding. The king's children are not his. They are abominations born of incest between the queen and her own brother. You have only to look on them and realize that there is not a drop of Baratheon blood in them, they are all blonde. All Lannister. Why your husband hides this I do not know. Perhaps he is biding his time. Perhaps it is a part of a wider plot. Perhaps he has been bribed by the Lannisters. I have been trying to get to the truth in this matter, but all of a sudden I am fleeing for my life. All I have ever done has been for the good of the realm. You know this to be true. I will send word when I reach safety, probably in Essos. We will see each other again, my sweet. With love. Petter. By the time he finished reading it his hand was shaking more than a bit. As for Ursula Stone, who had been craning over his arm to see it, she was pale and trembling. This, she started to say, this. He folded it back up immediately. This is a letter that some would kill for, he told her in a low and very grim voice. This is a letter that could start a civil war within the realm. He ran his hand over his short beard and tried to jam his thoughts back together in a coherent manner. Much to his surprise he succeeded. This is the hand of Petter Baelish. I should know. As I said, I caught the bastard. Problem is, how much is real and how much is lies? She stared at him and he smiled a particularly bitter smile. Petter Baelish, Steward Stone, was a conniving, double-dealing fucking weasel who gave particularly villainous weasels a bad name in comparison. He was a thief and a liar and, that worst of things, a man who thought himself cleverer than anyone else around him. When I caught him I knew that I couldn't trust him, no matter how much he tried to bribe me. For one thing, he kept offering my money that I knew he didn't have any more. For the other, I knew that he'd put me on his own personal list of people that he was going to do anything to see dead, just for outsmarting him. Seeing him dead was a relief. You were at his execution. She sounded surprised at that. I was. I was also the man who kept him alive to see first his trial and then his execution. He looked at the letter again. The trial, that was private. Just Baelish, Lord Arryn and Lord Stannis Baratheon. I wondered at that. No clerks, no guards, nothing. I did wonder at the time. Perhaps it was because of this. What Baelish mentioned. If it's true, well, Tywin Lannister would give anything to make this letter go away. Including wade through blood. His thoughts stopped skittering around and he looked around at the place that he had called home for these past few weeks. Well now. Time to choose. I am a sworn banner to Lord Arryn. He might no longer be the hand of the king, but this is a matter for him and his successor. I trust him more than I trust the word of Petter Baelish. And I have no wish for there ever to be a song called The Rains of Foxhold. She opened her mouth for a moment and then closed it and nodded just the once. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, straightened and then looked at him. For once she didn't look as if she thought that he was something scraped off a boot. What are your orders, Lord Foxhold? Bring me a piece of canvas, about 1/2 yard by 1/2 yard. And I'll need a needle and a tough thread. This letter must be secured properly and I'll do it myself. I want guards placed on Lady Arryn's chamber. Have the master at arms pick men who are reliable. Her people are to be split up and secured. I want none of them leaving. Maester Haster is to tend to her. We need her alive. And I need 5 good men as an escort. I will ride for King's Landing with this letter at once. I want you in charge of the Foxhold in my absence. Be watchful. Take care of our people. She gave him another look that again suggested that she didn't regard him as a deformed maggot. As my lord commands. And then she actually curtsied before hurrying off. He watched her go with a bemused look before shaking his head. And then for some reason he wished that he could pray at the nearest god's wood. For some reason he felt as if he could do with every possible help. Gendry. By the time that the docks of Dragonstone were finally in sight he felt as if he was about to fall over from sheer tiredness. It was a weariness that he had never known before. Not even the worst possible day at Master Mart's forge had he ever felt as tired as he did now, as he sat in a quiet corner of the deck. He was lucky, in a way. He hadn't been one of those sent up the remaining masts in all weather. Nor had he been one of those involved in fothering the ship to slow the seep of water through the hull from the place where the lost mast had hit the side of it, although he had pulled on a rope to help tie the canvas to the hull as tightly as possible. No, what he really ached from was the chain pump. The blasted device that sucked up water from the bilges and shot it over the side of the ship. The one thing that was keeping them afloat because of the water that was seeping through the fodder, or canvas, or whatever it bloody was, and threatening to sink the ship. Using the damn thing over a long period took stamina and strength. He had both. So he'd been at the chain pump more than others had. Around and bloody around. Endlessly. He'd tried to count the number of times he'd used the damn thing. He'd always failed, through exhaustion. Around and around. Each time saved the ship a little. And that little was the thing that drove him onwards. At least the crew appreciated what he had been doing. Gendry Strongarm they called him now. Good King Robert's natural son. He was too tired to think about it much. He still felt strange about the very thought. He frowned a little. The closer they got to Dragonstone the more he puzzled over it. Hearing the clump of sea boots he looked over to see Captain Hedrick approach. Ever seen Dragonstone before? The older man asked. Gendry shook his head tiredly. Never been far from King's Landing. He nodded at the fortress as it loomed ever closer. What are those things all over it? Hedrick barked a short choppy laugh. Dragons, lad. The old Targaryens were a bit dragon mad. Them and the Valyrians who held the island before them. Dragons on the brain. So they covered the place in dragon statues. The place is riddled with the bloody things. His skin crawled more than a bit. Dragons. He looked back at the fortress and the island behind it. It was rather eerie. The island itself gave him the creeping horrors. It was dominated by a giant mountain, except that this one was, well, steaming. A thin plume of smoke came from the tallest peak. Frankly, it was one of the bleakest places that he'd ever seen, grey and desolate, with just the odd splash of green here and there from trees. As they finally made it into the harbour and moored at one of the docks, he could see a number of people gathering and staring at the ship, at the jury-rigged mast and the canvas that had been used to fother the side of it. After a while a slightly stooped old man in black, with white hair and mutton chop whiskers, as well as a chain of some kind around his neck, arrived. What happened, Hedrick? The old man called out. You're normally so careful. We caught the arse end of a storm. There was a flaw in the mast that we hadn't spotted, and of course the wind finally had its way with it. Damaged the hull as it came down and we damn near broached. Fortunately this lad over here helped cut the sail loose in time. The old man nodded as he looked over at Gendry and then seemed to stagger, the blood draining from his face. By all the gods, Robert. Wait, no, it can't be, he muttered, and then as a gangplank was put into place he shuffled up it as fast as he could. Having reached the deck he stared at Gendry fixedly. Good gods. What's your name, lad? Gendry, my lord. Gendry Storm. The old man smiled slightly. I'm a maester, lad, not a lord. Maester Cresson is my name. And you are the very likeness of. Your name is Storm. Who is your father? He stared at the old man and then at the davit, the deck, the plank, a rope, a rat, and then back at the desk again. My lord, I mean Maester Cresson, they say. I mean, he said that. Well, my father is his grace, the king. He said those last few words in a low mutter. The maester stared at him for a long time and then nodded just the once. And I believe it. You are the spitting image of your father when he was but a lad himself. Extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. Then he seemed to shiver for a moment as he looked about the ship, before beckoning the captain over. Your pardon. Where are you bound for? Storm's End, Maester Cresson. A cargo for there plus the lad here. On the orders of King Robert himself. Hedrick said the words quietly. Cresson stared at him and then back at Gendry. I see. Well, you'll need a new mast stepped in. And will the ship need to be careened? Aye, she will. I'll not go anywhere until I've seen the damage repaired. It'll take a week at least. Can the lad be sent on? Cresson shook his head. I doubt it. Too many ships are going north these days. And I myself have sent off 3 ships to Eastwatch by the sea with, well, supplies of a kind. T's been a bewildering time of late. I shall check though. Gendry felt his eyelids fluttering and he shook his head for a moment. Gods, he was more tired than he thought. The Maester sighed for a moment. In the meantime, are you well, lad? He realized that his eyes had fluttered again and that he was almost asleep on his feet. Your pardon, I mean Maester. The lad's tired. He stood more than his fair share of shifts on the chain pump getting us here. He's done his duty, Cresson. Done his father proud, if I might say so. Gendry inspected his feet again, swayed slightly again and then suddenly found himself blinking furiously. On shore, lad. Get to the barracks. Get bath, a meal and a bed. We have all the help we need for the ship. He nodded, feeling increasingly exhausted, but then Cresson held a hand up. I think that I have better quarters for you. The Maester did indeed have better quarters. Dragonstone had tunnels snaking everywhere and he led Gendry to the finest quarters that he'd ever seen. For one thing, the bed had a pillow that wasn't stuffed with straw. There was also a room to one side with the oddest bath he'd ever seen. Warm water bubbled up from somewhere in it and then ran off to one side. A servant with a poorly hidden sneer of contempt had to tell him to just get in and start scrubbing. Whilst he did, the servant took his clothes and left with them at arm's length and a face that meant that they probably stank. Once he got out and found a robe, he also discovered that there was indeed a meal on a table to one side. It didn't last very long. And after that there was bed. It was ridiculously soft, but he didn't notice much as he fell asleep almost at once. When he woke up he had a moment of blurry confusion as he didn't recognize his surroundings, but he soon worked out where he was. His clothes weren't back yet, but someone had left some replacements. He fingered the cloth worriedly. It was too high quality, someone had made a mistake somewhere. He put the garments on anyway, he had nothing else to wear, as he had left his bag on the ship. Then he paused. His warhammer was propped up in one corner. He walked over to it and traced a finger over the head. He'd never really thought about it much, but who had his father ever used it against? Had it been used to kill people with? Was there blood on it? And did he care? He sighed and then jumped slightly as someone knocked on the door. When he opened the door to the corridor there was a servant waiting there, who looked rather baffled as to why he had opened the door. Maester Cresson desires to see you, the blond man said stiffly and then gestured to follow him. He found the Maester in a room with more books in it than he had ever seen before in his entire life. They seemed to be everywhere and he stared at them all in wonder, before a cough from the old man brought him back to the desk. Captain Hedrick sent your warhammer and clothing on. I'm having it cleaned. You had a rough passage. Everything smelt of sweat and seawater. He shifted uneasily on his feet. There was always too much to do. The Maester leant back in his chair and looked at him levelly. Captain Hedrick thinks highly of you. What will you do when you reach Storm's End? He shrugged. Don't rightly know. I'm to be trained, I know that much. Trained to use a warhammer. Though the only hammer I know how to use properly is one for a blacksmith. You were an apprentice blacksmith in King's Landing. I was. With Master Mart, in the Street of Steel. Cresson looked at him consideringly and was just opening his mouth to say something when someone knocked on the door before entering. She was a girl, short and with long braided black hair. Her ears stuck out more than a little, but that wasn't what caught his eye the most. No, what made his eyes widen was the grey skin on the left-hand side of her face and parts of her neck. Grayscale. He'd heard about this from some people. She looked at him curiously through a pair of sad eyes that grew a little sadder when she saw that he was staring at her. Then she turned back to the Maester. "Any word, Maester Cresson?" The Maester shook his head sadly. "None. I am sorry, child. The boat patrols came back again this morning. There is no sign of him anywhere. He must be dead." The girl sighed and wiped a tear from her eye. "I know," she said wretchedly. "I just hoped differently. Poor Patches." Cresson leant forwards and patted her hand awkwardly. Then he looked at Gendry. "Forgive my manners. Shireen, this is Gendry Storm. Gendry, this is the Lady Shireen Baratheon, daughter of Lord Stannis Baratheon and his wife Slyss Baratheon." Shireen peered at him almost shyly, before nodding her head at him, and then she paused and looked at him closely, intently. "Do I know you? You look familiar. Actually, you look like Uncle Robert." Gendry cringed a little, but for some reason the old man looked proud of the girl. "Very observant of you, my dear. Young Gendry is in fact the, natural son of his grace the king." She looked at him again, this time with a smile that transformed her grave features. "You're my cousin." He gaped at her. "Cousin? Well, I suppose so, but," she peered at him again, and then her lips quirked into a smile. "Yes, I'm your cousin." Shireen Maester Cresson started to say, but he was forestalled by Shireen. "Yes, I know, he's a natural son of Uncle Robert. I know that there's a word for it, and I know that Mother would be very snobbish about me meeting him. But she's not here right now. She's with Father in King's Landing. So therefore I respectfully don't care what she might think about me meeting Gendry." There was a short silence whilst Cresson and Gendry both stared at her, and then the Maester chuckled. "My dear, you are far older than your years at times." "Thank you." She looked at Gendry again. "Is this your first visit to Dragonstone?" "Aye, my lady, it is." She looked at him owlishly. "I suppose I'll have to teach you to call me cousin. Now I shall give you a tour. I have decided it, and in the absence of father and mother I am in charge. Is that not so, Maester Cresson?" The old man threw his hands up and then clasped them together. "Oh, entirely so." And so Gendry found himself getting a detailed tour of Dragonstone, with Shireen pointing out all the various odd nooks and crannies as a few servants trailed behind them discreetly. And saw umpteen statues of dragons. As he looked around a feasting room that had been built in the shape of a bloody dragon, he finally voiced what he had been thinking for some time: they were mad for dragons, weren't they? She perched herself on a bench and smiled slightly at him. They were. They were Valyrians, after all. And they weren't very nice people. They were very cruel. They enslaved people, killed people. And then came the Doom. But the Targaryens came here before the Doom. She looked at him gravely. "We're both part Targaryen, did you know that?" No, he had not, and he felt a little faint at the thought. And then she continued the tour, moving on from room to room. Only once did she show any reluctance to go anywhere, when they approached a room with large arched windows. That's the room where Patches jumped," Shireen whispered. "On the night he died." He thought desperately about something to say. "Odd name that, Patches." "Patchfist," she said sadly. "His name was Patchfist. I called him Patches though. He was my friend. My only real friend, odd though he was. He almost drowned on the day that my grandfather and grandmother died in a shipwreck. He was a jester. He made me laugh. And then almost a week ago he went mad. And he threw himself from one of those windows. He had known that she was a desperately lonely little girl almost from the start, but that about broke his heart. "I'm sorry," he said eventually. "You miss him?" "I do," she said simply. "But his last words were an odd message to me. Said that I should seek out the Godswood here." Confused, he stared at her. "There's a Godswood here?" "No. There's no record of one, not here on Dragonstone. The oldest records don't mention that there was one here when the Valyrians came here. So why did he say that I should seek out something that isn't here?" One thing that occurred to him was to point out that she had said that the man had gone mad, but that wouldn't have been polite to point out, so instead he led her away from the room, pointing out a few little carved dragons that were in dark corners. I keep trying to count the number of dragons here and I keep having to amend my total, she said wryly, before finishing the tour in the most amazing room he had ever seen, a room with open windows to one side and a table carved into the shape of Westeros itself. Aegon the Conqueror had this made, she pointed out in a matter-of-fact voice, so that he could plan the conquest. He gaped at it. And then, after a guard cleared his throat meaningfully, he ended up back in the Maester's room. The Maester greeted them both and he thanked Shireen for the tour. She smiled at him and then left, leaving him alone with the Maester. A sweet girl, Gendry said. Lady, I mean. She is a treasure, the Maester said with a smile. News from Captain Hedrick. Repairs proceed apace and he thanks you for your analysis of the bad iron in the upper works. It's being replaced. Hopefully, if things go as planned, you can resume your journey to Storm's End in a few days. Can I help at all? I mean, with the ironwork. The Maester laughed a little. Nay, it's all in hand. Dragonstone has been a naval base many times before. There are ample supplies and blacksmiths aplenty. I have arranged for you to take a meal in your quarters again. You look tired, my boy. That was true enough, and he ate the meal with gusto before falling, exhausted, into bed again that night and then sleeping very heavily. His dreams were odd though, and disturbed him a bit. When he woke up again in the morning he had a vague memory of a dream of snow, trees and a woman. He broke his fast in his room, uneasy at the thought that people were waiting upon him, before going for a walk. Somehow he found his way back down to the docks, but noticed that the ship he had come on had been moved to the different part of the docks, far further away, where it was getting a new mast installed. He watched from a distance, feeling vaguely frustrated at not being able to help, but then had to admit that there was nothing he could do. So instead he walked off in the opposite direction. Eventually he ended up on a beach to one side of the harbor. Knowing that there was a corpse somewhere out there made him watch the high tide mark with more than a little concern, but he saw nothing apart from seaweed and the odd dead fish. He wandered on, noticing that the tide was going out, and then eventually stopped by a cliff face and peered back at what he could see of the island. The mountain, Fire Mountain, or volcano as Shireen had called it, was still smoking, and he wondered about that. The fortress itself though was still ugly, he had to admit that. A massive, brooding, dragon statue-studded thing. He sighed. What would Storm's End be like? The wind kicked up for a moment and he shivered a little. And then he saw it, a leaf in the far distance. It rose and fell in the wind, blowing this way and that, and he watched it with amusement. He felt a bit like that leaf. The wind was blowing him, and where would it take him? The wind died down and the leaf fell to earth by his feet. He bent down to look at it and then he picked it up and frowned at it. It was red. Strange. Leaves were green normally, weren't they? Except during autumn of course, but this was still summer. He twirled it by the stalk for a moment and then he froze. Someone had once told him that the only trees with red leaves were weirwood trees. Which were in the north. Or in God's woods. Still holding the leaf he started to walk back to the fortress, only to stop as a group of figures appeared in front of him. It was Shireen, along with two guards. "Hello," she called out, "I tried to find you to talk to you, but you weren't in your room. Then someone said that they'd seen you out here. What are you looking for?" He walked up to her and then held the leaf out. "Here, that just blew onto my feet." She looked at it curiously and then she gasped. "It's from a weirwood tree. Where did you find it?" He pointed to the spot and they both hurried over to it, before looking around. The wind was from that direction, he told her, pointing. The leaf came from there. "Then we need to look there," she said decisively. "That cliff looks sheer, but, let's look." The cliff did indeed look sheer, and as they looked he started to doubt their discovery. The island was rocky and barren. What if the leaf had come from a dying tree? And then he saw it. The faintest of carvings on the cliff face, worn by rain and time. It looked like a carving of a tree with a face. He stepped back and looked at the cliff. There was a notch there, a place where there might once have been an opening, far above the high tide mark. It was clogged with rocks and he started to pull them out. After a moment Shireen joined him. "What is it?" "There might be something here." "Stand back, this might be dangerous." She stood back and he started to pull out more rocks and other debris, tree branches and other things. And then a rock fell away and he saw something that made him stop. There's a wall here. A wall. He pulled more rocks away and then peered again. A wall. We need something to break it down. And fetch Maester Cresson. Shireen barked orders and the guards stared at her before running off. The one asked to bring a pickaxe arrived first and Gendry plucked it from his hands and then swung it straight at the top of the wall. Metal sparked a little on stone and the pickaxe jarred a little in his hands, but he clenched his hands harder and then swung again. The stones crumbled under his onslaught and he hammered at it, again and again and again. As it started to collapse he gestured for Shireen to stay back. By the time that a puffing Maester Cresson arrived he'd cleared the wall and also the earth and debris that had collected behind it. The Maester stared in astonishment at the cleft, muttered about what the carving might mean and then told Gendry to keep going. He did. More blows cleared the last of it and then he stared up at the narrow cleft that the wall had been hiding. It's a path, he muttered. Going up. But up to where? Let's find out. Shireen burst out. But Gendry placed a hand on her shoulder. I'll go first, he told her. It might be dangerous. He was right to go on ahead of the others. The path was narrow and in places it was almost blocked by rocks and stones that had come down from the cliffs to either side. Twice he had to stop and then send the others back to the start of the narrow winding path as he cleared out rocks and made the footing underfoot less treacherous, resulting in debris skittering downhill. How long had it been since anyone had been on this path? He looked at the debris as he made his way up. It all looked like stones from rock slides from the cliffs on either side and he wondered how this path had even come to exist. Who could have come here? The first men. Hearing excited chatter behind him he smiled. Shireen's reaction to their discovery had been one of sheer excitement. He was growing fond of the girl. She was clever and desperately lonely, especially after the death of the dead fool. And how had a madman known of this path, which had been blocked off for what must have been hundreds of years at least? He tested one section, pushed a boulder carefully to one side as it almost blocked a bend in the path and then pushed around the bend itself. And then he stopped dead in his tracks. What is it, Gendry? Shireen piped up from behind him and he stumbled forwards a few feet. As the others saw what had stopped him his tracks they paused too. In front of them the cleft widened into a small natural bowl shape, with cliffs towering to the north and east. And in that bowl were trees. There were 10 of them, full-sized, and some saplings, as well as some dead trunks. They were stunted in places, probably because the soil was so thin and rocky. But they all had red leaves and white bark. And the biggest of them all, it had a face carved onto it. A solemn face that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as he looked at it. It's a godswood, Maester Cresson breathed as he walked up to Gendry. By the gods. I don't believe it. Why did no one ever see it before? The path was blocked, Maester, he pointed out. Then he paused. Oh wait, they had dragons, didn't they? Perhaps the cliffs hid it. Odd. He walked closer to the trees, with an awestruck Shireen next to him and Cresson a few steps after them both. Patches said that I had to seek this out. But why? Shireen asked and he could only shake his head in bafflement. This place, it's old, he stammered eventually. So very old. And he knew that it was true even as he said it. A silence fell as they looked around the place before they all turned back to the tree. Even the guards were in awe of the place. And then Gendry saw something out of the corner of one eye. The cliff came close to one tree but there was an overhand and beneath it a pile of stones. A rather regular pile of stones. What's that? Maester Cresson followed his pointing finger and then walked over to it. It's a cairn, he said quietly. I think it's a grave. He approached it with Gendry and then paused. Oh. What is it? The Maester reached down with a hand that shook slightly and picked something up that had been laid on the cairn. It looked like a pair of ancient and very worn antlers, attached to a rotted piece of what might once have been leather. This is, perhaps the grave of a green man. But that's... I don't understand. Maester Cresson, Shireen piped up, Gendry's right. This place is very old. Who could have carved that tree? And if that's the grave of a green man, Then who buried him? She walked up to the tree with a face carved onto it. And this is a heart tree, is it not? Yes. Yes, it is, Cresson said thickly. I must consult the histories again and... They never heard what he was about to say next, because at that moment Shireen reached out and laid a hand on the trunk of the heart tree. For a moment Gendry felt as if the ground had shook, but the leaves on the trees stayed motionless. And then Shireen's eye blazed with red fire like the heart of a forge. Gendry stared in shock and the others cried out, but all of a sudden everyone seemed to be frozen to the spot. After a long moment Shireen looked at them, red fire still burning in her eyes. And then she spoke. A child born from storm and garden. It is as it was foretold. The blood of the first men still burns here, like the heart of the mountain. Send the harvest on. The dragon glass is needed on the wall. Gendry gaped and then voiced what they were all thinking. Who are you? The red fire focused on him. Another child of the storm. Well met. You have many miles ahead of you, child of the storm. Your father will need you. Who are you? Cresson barked, and the red eyes narrowed as they gazed at him. You stand in a god's wood. The gods are here. You are the old gods. Maester Cresson asked in what looked like deep shock. We are. We speak through this child as a conduit. You have found this place again. We wax. Send the dragon glass north. The Stark in Winterfell needs it. And the Maesters of Old Town, they must not meddle any further. The call has been sent. Magic has returned. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Cresson went white. And Gendry looked back into those terrible, implacable eyes. What must I do? Help your father. The Storm King returns, within him. The gaze returned to Maester Cresson. You heard the seer. He was touched by things that some would not have survived. And he gave his life for this life. The bargain was struck. We will honor it. Red fire seemed to envelop Shireen for a moment, and as Gendry watched, the grayscale on her face rippled and boiled before peeling off and then bursting into flames. Her very skin and muscles seemed to glow for a long moment, then the fire faded. A life for a life, she whispered, and then the flames in her eyes were snuffed out and she swayed and then collapsed. Willers. He read the report carefully, then pulled a piece of parchment towards him and jotted off a note to look into the production figures from the southwest area of the Reach in more detail. The projected harvest figures from there were odd. At least a third higher than they should have been. A lot more land seemed to be under production than was usual. People seemed to be clearing more fields for planting, sowing more seed than normal, doing all the things that might be expected ahead of a bad winter. It frightened him in a way. What did the small folk know that he didn't? Why weren't more nobles complaining? Was it this call that his father denied so much, simply because he refused to believe that Ned Stark could have any kind of power over the Reach? Father had written to the citadel at Old Town, hoping to hear that magic had not returned. Willers had also written to the citadel. The Maesters had sent back the same short, almost bitter, answer: the glass candles are alight. Magic has returned. Father thought that this was some kind of move in the Game of Thrones. He did not. This was not a part of the game, this was a lightning bolt from a cloudless sky. This was a sign that there were other powers at work. He sighed. Father was not the only person who denied the facts as he saw them. Loras had returned from King's Landing and he was not in a good mood. He was convinced that at some point the king would have to set aside his wife Cersei. Why exactly, he thought that he had not yet explained to Willers, who had his own sources and knew the terrible secret that Loras was, extremely close to Renly Baratheon. Father seemed to be abnormally pleased with himself at the moment, as he probably thought that this plan involving Renly somehow getting Margaery married to the king was one of the few things that he seemed to be in control over at the moment. His own plan. No one else's, of course. Typical of Father. He sighed and rubbed his forehead for a moment. Willers had let it quietly be known that he was dealing with administrative matters for the Reach. He had let others know even more quietly that he had heard the call. Word had gone out about his discovery of the statue of Garth Greenhand. Word was spreading. And people were listening more to him than to Father. He had to be careful. Father had to keep his dignity. But there was something happening here that was more important than anything he had ever done before. The clack of a cane proclaimed the arrival of grandmother. She sat opposite him with a slight grunt and then fixed him with a gimlet eye. "Your father looks like he's planning something," she snorted. "And I finally know what. He wants Margaery to be queen. Because young foolish Renly Baratheon thinks that he can persuade his brother to abandon the wife he hates and who just happens to be Tywin Lannister's daughter for one that he might possibly like better. Foolishness." Willers put his quill down and raised an eyebrow. "Grandmother, the very fact that you know about that shouldn't surprise me. The dangers associated with it are terrifying. The threat from the Lannisters if they find out that father is plotting to get the king a new wife." Grandmother snorted. "Good, you're not a fool. Unlike your father." "Oh, stop that eyebrow business, you know that I'm correct. How I birthed such a blockhead still eludes me. We both know the risks in this. And it is foolish to think that anything good can possibly come from it." "I doubt that Tywin Lannister knows about it," Willers muttered. "If he did, well, he would have probably had an apoplexy by now from pure rage. The very thought alone would have made him incandescent." He shook his head. "I will talk to father. Laura's too. Now is not the time to get involved in such an affair. There is too much to do. And besides, I would see Margaery happy. I doubt that the king would make her so. He has been in a slough of despond since Lyanna Stark died." Grandmother looked at him carefully and then nodded. "Good luck with that," she said shrewdly. "Your father will disagree. But then of course he's a nincompoop. And I agree with what you think about Robert Baratheon. In the meantime, word is spreading." "Word of what?" "Word of your discovery. Word of your being healed. Word of this call to the north." "Ah. The call, again." He sighed a little. "The blood of the first men is strong in many places. In both of us," she said crisply. "My nephew Paxter has written to me." This call rang loud in the Ubber. "Ships have been sailing north with supplies for the war. And more fields are being planted than I have ever heard of before. You are right to concentrate on this." He nodded and was about to speak further when there was a knock on the door. He looked over to see a servant standing there. "What is it, Corinne?" "Beg pardon for disturbing you, Lord Willers, but Lord Randall Tarly is here and wishes to speak to you. He and his son." He blinked at this and then looked at grandmother, who also looked surprised. "Randall Tarly? Here? Very well, show him in." As he stood to greet their guests he saw at once that the surprises did not end there. As Randall Tarly strode in and bowed, his bald head gleaming a little, Willers could see a wide figure behind him. Oh! It was Samwell Tarly, with an odd-long canvas bag, as long as from his shoulder to his feet. He'd heard a rumor that the boy was on the point of volunteering to take the black at the insistence of his father. Then he looked again as he gestured at them to sit. Randall Tarly looked, well, unlike his usual decisive self. Instead he looked uneasy and uncomfortable. As for Samwell Tarly, well, he looked as if he hadn't slept in a week and there might even have been a hint of cheekbone somewhere on his face. He looked as if he hadn't eaten in a week as well. But there was something else. A gleam of triumph. "Odd. Lord Tarly," he began. "How can I help you?" Much to his surprise this question was met by a strained silence. Randall Tarly was a man who called a spade a bloody shovel, but for what looked like the first time in his life he looked as if he was speechless. The big man sat there, clenching and unclenching his hands, as his face worked in an effort to get a word out. It was Samwell Tarly who finally broke the silence. "It's this call, you see, Lord Willers." Randall Tarly looked at his son with what looked like a combination of annoyance and relief. It was a look that made him seem slightly demented. "Yes," he finally said. "The call. It was loud at Horn Hill. Very loud." And both Tarlys were pale as he said those words, with Samwell nodding hard. And then the dreams started. Willers swapped glances with his grandmother. The two Tarlys had now gone even paler, if such a thing was possible. "Dreams," he prompted after a moment. "Aye. Dreams. Dreams of the aftermath of the Field of Fire. Dreams of the death of the nephew of Mern 9, burned horribly there. Both men were now a little green, Samwell Tarly more so than his father. He died days after the battle. After a moment Randil Tarly rallied a little. Lord Willers. House Tarly is an old one. Hornhill dates back to the days of the first men. But we have long been sworn to Highgarden. He looked at Willers and straightened a little in his seat. Before the Tyrells we were sworn to the Gardener Kings. We were their first marshals. There was a reason for that, or so Sam here tells me. The younger Tarly had been twitching with excitement and at his father's invitation he leant forwards. Tarly is old name, Lord Willers. It dates back to the language of the first men and it's two words put together. Originally Tarly meant spearkeeper. This meant nothing at all to Willers but not to grandmother, who sat up with a jerk. Spearkeeper. The Tarlis held the great spear of the Gardeners. Both Tarlis spoke at once. And then Randil Tarly cleared his throat whilst looking very uncomfortable. It was said that the spear was always held in the keeping of the eldest son of House Tarly. Always. She stared at them both. That spear was destroyed at the field of fire though. Another silence. The dreams said not, Randil Tarly finally said. And the stories that my grandfather once told me. Tales I thought to be ridiculous. Legends. The babbling of an old man. But the dreams kept coming, Samwell Tarly broke in. And they were vivid. My son, here, he dreamt them more vividly than others. More so than his brother. More so than I did. Or his mother. Randil Tarly's ears had gone an odd red color and he seemed to have trouble with a number of the words. So, he was allowed into the library to look in the books. There was something in the air that was odd. Willers looked at the two men. Allowed in the library. Lord Tarly's ears turned a shade deeper red. The boy spent too long there as it was. Before. Not enough time training. His son glared at him for an instant before looking back at the bag again and smirking a little. I went through the books, the younger Tarly said. All of them. Dating back to the earliest years of the Tarlis, to see how far back we were keepers of the spear. And then to the field of fire. The hidden records said that the spear was saved by the nephew of Mern 9. He took terrible burns for it, but he saved it. And then, on his deathbed, he summoned Ricard Tarly to him, our ancestor. He was the one who had brought the spear to the Gardener King. Why did the Gardener Kings not have it all the time? Willers asked, fascinated. The Tarlis looked at each other. It was made by Bran the Builder, they say, Samwell Tarly continued. For Garth Greenhand, or his sons at least. The books said that it could be used to rally men, like the Fist of Winter, and to dispense justice. It was more than ceremonial, it had power. I think that they were cautious about it. The Fist of Winter. A mace. Owned by the Starks. Long lost, the books said. Once I read them, that is. His eyes slid over to his father, whose ears had turned red again. Anyway, Mern's nephew gave the spear to Ricard Tarly. Told him to hide it. Said that he'd had a dream. His eyebrows went up and down again. He'd tried to warn his uncle. He didn't listen. And he told the then Lord Tarly to keep the spear until it was needed again. Lord Tarly nodded. The records were very clear about that. And then he stood and turned to his son and nodded firmly. Samwell stood as well and opened the canvas bag and pulled out a short stabbing spear, about 4 feet long and with an odd white blade with peculiar black things embedded in holes in the latter. He hefted it for a moment and then placed it on the desk in front of Willers. There, he said hoarsely. The spear of the Gardener Kings. Willers stared at it with more than a hint of utter bafflement. This was utterly unexpected. Where was it again? He finally said. Hidden in the armory at Hornhill, Randil Tarly said gruffly. Then, after Samwell cleared his throat meaningfully, he clarified, there was a secret room built into the armory. My son noticed that the inside of one end of it was, shorter than the building measured on the outside. We discovered a hidden door. Lock needed a lot of oil, but one of my grandfather's keys worked in it. He once told me that it was important. He once told me that the book with the tale that we found in it about the spear was important. I paid him no mind. It was just a book. Just a key. His ears were bright red again, as was the back of his neck, and he refused to look at his son. Finally he said in a strained and hollow voice, "I was wrong." Another silence, and this one let him inspect the spear. It didn't look anything like most spears that he had ever known. It was all made from some kind of metal, with leather wrappings down the last third of it. It had runes of some sort written down the side that was facing him. And the blade, the black things looked like stones, but some kind of stone that was black in some places, almost red in others, and like streaked and murky glass in others still. Grandmother seemed to have gone into some kind of shock. The Hightowers, the Florents and the Red Wines gave up looking for this after the Field of Fire. They all thought it was gone, melted by the dragon fire. Whoever held it was supposed to be the rightful ruler of the Reach. "Begging your pardon, Lady Oleana, that's why it was hidden," Samwell Tarly said grimly. "It would have been fought over. And the time had not yet come for it to return to Highgarden." "But that time is now?" Grandmother asked caustically. "Why?" "The call," Randil Tarly grunted. "The call has gone out. The others have returned. The Stark in Winterfell needs our help. We are needed. House Tarly will send help to the wall. But first this had to be brought here. Mern's nephew left a message. The spear has to go to the man within whom the blood of Garth Greenhand rings true. The man who will find the Gardener's Rest in Highgarden and restore the spring there. The man whose leg was broken and then remade. The man who saw the Field of Fire through Mern's eyes." Randil Tarly looked at him carefully. "That would be you. Not your father." Willers stood slowly and then reached out and picked it up. It was heavy in an odd way, as if he was holding something heavy with time as well as weight. He could see its use now. Used with a shield, yes, this could be something to stab at any enemy. This was something from an earlier age. A more violent age. Something seemed to shift under his feet a little, and he looked about the room quickly before returning his gaze to the spear. Grandmother was staring at him, or rather at his eyes, for a moment, before shaking her head. "A trick of the light," she muttered. "Does it have a name?" Randil Tarly said. "It does. Otherbane. Kevan." The door to Tywin's Solar was closed as he walked down the corridor, but as he approached it the door opened and a Septon came out. Oh. It was that idiot again. Then he looked more closely. The Septon was pale and shaking and looked as if he was about to vomit as he walked down the corridor. Seeing Kevan's glance at him, he gave a ghastly smile and then fled. He found Tywin at his desk, a look of deep concentration on his face. As Kevan sat, Tywin finally looked up. "Astonishing, isn't it? The power of faith. Or should that be faith in power? Septons." He spat the last word bitterly and then steepled his hands. "Idiots, the lot of them. Worse, dangerous idiots." Kevan raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? For what reason?" His brother sighed and then tossed a message across the desk at him. One of the last messages sent by Jon Arryn, before he was attacked. It warns of a worrying event in the Great September of Baelor. Of mutterings amongst the Septons and Septars. And of rumors of the resurgence of the Faith Militant. This time the last words were said in a tone of unremitting bitterness that made the previous tone seem almost happy. Kevan said after a moment. "Not your favorite group at all. Not even in the slightest." He leant back in his chair with what looked like a visible effort of will to appear to be calm. "If there's one thing that all my years as Hand of the King taught me, it's that you always look for the slightest sign of the Faith Militant. Everywhere. Because they never truly went away, Baelor's law notwithstanding. Various High Septons have always tried to have the law repealed. They cited umpteen events, umpteen attacks on the clergy of the faith. Some were even real. I always said no. As has every other Hand before and since my time. They said that it was a question of protecting the faithful. They lied. It was always about power. There's always been a balance of power between kings and nobles in Westeros. Delicate at times, no matter what part of the kingdom as a whole, but a balance. The Faith Militant was an effort by the faith to insert themselves into that balance, to become a greater player in this greater Game of Thrones. High Septons who could call upon knights and others to use the threat of violence. Well, at the very least no king would ever be able to control the Great September again, still less the Starry September. At most, can you imagine it? A king forced to take the High Septon seriously. Oh, don't look at me like that. The last few High Septons have been idiots. I should know, I knew them, or at least knew of them. You should have seen the ones I used to get appointed when I was hand. Some of them genuinely thought that they had been appointed by their peers. Kevan blinked a little. And the Septon who just left. An idiot. But one capable of listening to facts, namely that any recurrence of the faith militant in the Westerlands, no matter what the cause, would meet with my extreme displeasure. And this made Kevan wince a little. Extreme displeasure. How final would that be? Oh, the usual. If anyone raises a force of arms on my lands without my permission, that would be cause for their heads to be on spikes soon after. All their heads. Starting with any foolish Septon who might have thought about giving permission for such a group. Oh, and the executioner would have a blunt sword. Subtle, Kevan pointed out dryly as he finally started to read the message. Did it have the desired effect? His brother scratched at an eyebrow. Possibly, he conceded after a long moment. I'll see what his words are worth, if anything. A firm hand and a few object lessons should suffice, for the Westerlands at least. No, it's the Riverlands I'm worried about. More rumors about fighting near God's Eye. If the unrest starts to spread closer to us and if it gets anywhere near Golden Tooth, I'll consider more stern actions. Kevan wasn't entirely paying attention, because he was staring at the message. The statues of the seven at the Great September have changed. How? A pretty riddle, is it not? I wonder how it was done. Some clever Septon. It seems to have fooled Jonarin for the time being. And Stannis Baratheon. Ah. That. Yes, that's the part which worries me. Stannis Baratheon is a dour and humorless man, but if there is one thing that he is not, then that's credulous. Or religious. If he was taken in by this mummery. What if it's not mummery? What if it was the Seven delivering a warning? Why now, after so long a silence? The call. A long silence fell, as Tywin sank a little deeper into his chair and glowered at the farthest wall. The call. That still puzzles me. I did not hear it, but I felt something. Something that took us both to that room. Others heard a voice. A call to aid the Stark in Winterfell. That is something that I cannot explain. He shifted his chair a little closer to the desk and looked at his older brother. Tywin, something is happening. The small folk are whispering. They speak of a long winter coming. Crops are being planted in places where they haven't been in some time. Firewood is being chopped, when it is still summer. I know, Tywin said. My own people have told me as such. They also say that help should be sent to the wall. And then there is talk of the blood of the first men. He hesitated and then threw another message across the table. From Tyrion in Winterfell. Kevan peered at it and then looked up, confused. Did he write this whilst drunk? It makes no sense. The faintest part of the beginning of a smile came and went in a heartbeat on Tywin's face. He left out the vowels from the more unimportant words in an effort to get the most words in. Clever of him. You just have to think about it. He looked back at the message and then started to read it out, stumbling occasionally. Lord Stark, Lord Stark, obviously prepares, yes, prepares for war at the wall. Sent out the call. Claims that the others are coming. WLDLNGS. Wildlings, yes, fleeing south. Night's Watch needs, support. Old gods have spoken to him. Stark has a direwolf. He looked up at this. Old gods. What nonsense is this? Of course Ned Stark has a direwolf, it's on his damn banner. You missed out a word. LV. What? Stark has a live direwolf. Keep reading. A live direwolf, that has given birth to pups. Stark children have direwolves now. Boltons, Umbers and Reeds at Winterfell. Appeal to King Robert discussed. Help to wall coming from all over realm. Stark worried about Ironborn. Iron Fleet building. Balon Greyjoy dangerous. Beware possible raids, coast of Westerlands. Ask Maestus about the crook in the stars. He's underlined this next bit. Winter is coming. He put it down. Most peculiar. Tywin drummed his fingers on the desk for a moment. Some of the more important lords of the north in Winterfell. Starks always say that winter is coming. They're always right about it. That's how they've kept the north safe through winters that would freeze even the best prepared Lannister to the bone. That said, I don't know what to do now. In reaction to that message, that is. There was an odd look to his brother, a look of anger and bafflement. The last time that Kevan had seen anything close to that look was the day that he'd heard that Jaime had been appointed to the Kingsguard. You don't know what to do. No. Tywin spat almost savagely, before seeming to catch himself and then reassemble his calm. Tyrion says that Stark is preparing for war. Of its own, that would confuse me. A war against who? The Riverlands. That would pit him against his dying good father and his wastrel good brother. The Vale perhaps. No, Ned Stark would cut off his own hand rather than attack Jon Arryn's home. The Iron Islands. Perhaps. There's no love lost between him and Balon Greyjoy, and apparently the Iron Fleet is being rebuilt, which is a bad sign. But Stark holds the Greyjoy heir in Winterfell, and Robert Baratheon would adore another war against the Ironborn that he despises so much, so why prepare on his own? But Tyrion says that Stark is preparing for a war north of the Wall. That means against perhaps the Wildlings. Except that Tyrion says that they are fleeing south. Why would Wildlings flee? The others, of legend. Legend. He pinched the bridge of his nose for a long moment. There are many points to consider here, brother. If I call the banners to help support the Starks, then people will ask, why, for what reason? If I say because of the others, then they will stare at me as if I am mad. Those that refuse the call, that is. They will say that the others are a legend of the north. That Tywin Lannister is afraid of ghosts and tales that men tell to frighten small children. Kevan looked at his brother. And what of those who heard this call and who say that you are reacting to a real threat? Tywin stared at the other wall again. How many who heard that call are still convinced that they heard it at all? Can I risk taking such a gamble? All my life I have striven to make House Lannister a force to be reckoned with again, a force to be feared. I am not our father, and I have always done my best to tell people that. I am not father, with his weaknesses, his fancies and his theories. But if I say that I believe in this call, if say that I believe that something is north of the Wall and coming for us, without any other proof, what then? What will people say? Will they follow, or will they laugh at me? Ah. Kevan nodded slowly as he thought it all through. You need more then. I need more. Tyrion's letter is a start. He has earned a little of my respect. He is a better man than you think, brother. But then I have told you that many times. Tywin snorted. At present he's the best of a bad lot. Jaime spends all his time thinking up clever things to say. I wanted him at my side instead of in that damned white cape, but he still remains in the Kingsguard, guarding a whoring sort of a man, although the last reports from King's Landing do say that Robert Baratheon is changing a bit. Cersei. She remains an idiot. Her last letter told me, as if I was hers to command, that I should press to be the new hand of the king. Despite that, the fact that Stannis Baratheon already holds that position. My daughter, she thinks she's clever and she's not. She thinks she's cunning and she's not. No, she's a vindictive little idiot with little idea about the real world. Which leaves the dwarf, who drinks too much and sees too many whores. And you would have him as Lord of Casterly Rock. I would have you trust him more, give him duties and responsibilities and then assess him on his own worth. Of course he drinks and whores. He has too much time on his hands. Is he doing that in Winterfell at the moment, or is he sending you valuable intelligence? A dangerous silence fell as Tywin glared at him, before taking back the message and then glaring at that instead. We shall see. In the meantime we can look at one thing at least, go to Lannisport and inspect our defenses. If Balon Greyjoy is thinking anything particularly stupid, then I want to cut his manhood off before his fleets get anywhere even near the Westerlands. Oberyn. His brother took one look at his face as he entered and then straightened in his wheelchair. What is it? You are pale, Oberyn. He tried to smile a little, but knew that it looked more like a grimace than an actual smile. He was tired and shaken. Plus his hand still hurt from all the writing he had done. I have been calculating, my prince, he replied formally. Doran's eyes narrowed a little. So formal, my brother. So formal. He sat down. Winter is coming. I have spent I don't know how many days on the calculations, backed up with messages to Garin, now an Archmaester, at the Citadel, to check my findings. And what I have confirmed is that a long winter is coming. It will be a bad one, brother. A silence fell, broken only by the sound of water gurgling from pool to pool nearby. How bad? Doran eventually asked. As long as the summer has been. Plus or minus a year, depending on the finer details of my calculations. Summer has lasted for 9 years so far. You are certain that the winter will be as long? He sighed. The science of calculating the celestial spheres about us, as Garin describes it, is an intricate one. It depends on detailed observations at night, with a Mirish spyglass on a tripod. The only good thing about was the waiting. Elaria will hold off on the moon tier for a while, I think. He paused. I might even decide about, well, we will see. She's thinking about things. In the meantime, we know that we are one of a number of other worlds that go around our Sunday. Think of it like a great dance. Our world flings itself about the sun at the same time as other worlds. Our orbits are not circular. They are ellipses, we think. Combine them all together and you have the most complicated dance in existence. And sometimes, they all align. On one side of the sun or the other. And sometimes, we are on one side and all the other worlds are on the other. I think that such times affect us. Affect the tilt of our world. Pull us a little, perhaps one way and then the other. Hence a long summer leading to a long winter. Doran asked shrewdly. And, word of the others? Of magic? Oberyn paused and thought deep and hard. I don't know, he said heavily. Perhaps things like magic wax and wane because of the dance of those celestial spheres that Garin talks about. Perhaps there are other causes at work. Perhaps, well, I would be a liar if I told you that I know anything for sure about magic, except that it exists. It might have its own logic, but one other than that of men. Doran nodded slowly as he absorbed this. And the Citadel agrees with you. Garin at the Citadel agrees with me. The rest of the Maesters, well, there will be a lot of careful checking of calculations and then arguing about what it all means. There are always Maesters who disagree because of their own theories. His brother raised an eyebrow. Theories? Oberyn laughed softly for a moment. I once met a Maester who claimed that we live not on a world but within a sphere. But then he also claimed that sparrows talked about him under their wings when he passed them. Nevertheless, they will confirm my calculations, I think. Eventually. Doran sighed a little. So in the meantime Dawn must prepare for a long winter. The good news is that it should not get too cold this far south. And the change of season should mean more rain. We might well be able to grow food at a time when it's too cold for that further north. And the bad news. There is a legend told by the Stony Dornish about the last long winter, the long night they call it. Apparently it snowed everywhere in West Eos. Even here. Who knows what it will be like? We should plan for the worst. Very well, Doran said quietly. I shall start to put together a plan. More food, more preparation, more planning. And, perhaps, better relationships with the border lords in the Reach and the Stormlands. That might be best, Brother Oberyn agreed, before looking up as Hotter appeared to one side and bowed. Your pardon, my prince, but there is a man here who says that he has news of Lord Dane. Doran looked at the hulking captain of his guard and then looked at Oberyn. Who is he? He says that his name is Myras, captain of the Seahorse, which took Lord Dane to King's Landing. He has ill news, my prince. Oberyn sighed a little and then looked over at the water gardens, as Doran did the same. Very well, Hotter. Bring him here. The captain was a tall, dark-haired man who looked as if he was bearing a great weight. The moment that he saw them he bowed. "My prince, Prince Oberyn. I am Myra's. It was my honor to take Lord Alsterdane to King's Landing. It is my sorrow to tell you that he died there." "I feared that was so," Doran said with a sigh. "He was ill enough when he left here." "Good captain, what happened?" Myra's closed his eyes for a moment. "When he boarded he did not say that he was ill, my prince. I started to suspect it as we headed north though. I wanted to make for the nearest port to seek a maester, but he insisted that we head for King's Landing. He had to see his son, he said. He was insistent about it, dreadfully so. He had to see his son. So, we crammed on more sail, perhaps more than was safe at times. By the time we were 5 days from King's Landing he was no longer well enough to stand, let alone make it onto deck. Instead he spent his time in his cabin, writing instructions for his son, he said. When we got to King's Landing we were lucky enough to find a member of the King's Guard there. Sir Jaime Lannister. He sent word to the Red Keep for Lord Dane's son to come at once. It was hard, but Oberyn somehow managed to keep his lip from curling at the very mention of the word Lannister. Now was not the time, even if the man in question had once expressed regret about what had happened to Elia and her children. Sir Davos Seaworth was also there and he organized things to a nicety. Lord Dane was brought ashore on a litter and a maester was summoned at once. The maester, well, he said that Lord Dane was lucky to have lived as long as he had. And then Lords Arryn and Baratheon, Lord Stannis Baratheon, arrived. They calmed Lord Dane a little. Before his son arrived. He handed over Dorne then. Oberyn asked shrewdly. Aye, he did. Sir Jaime brought the blade from Seahorse. And he did not look happy about holding it. Lord Dane was particular about that blade. Tywin Lannister's son did not appear to be content in holding it. Most odd. Remembering the feel of the blade when he had laid a hand on it before, Oberyn found himself shuddering in agreement. Yes, that damn blade was odd. More than odd in fact. And then Lord Dane's son, Edric Dane, arrived. Myros bowed his head for a long moment. Lord Dane handed Dorne over to him. Told him that he was now the Sword of the Morning. Told him that he had to find a Godswood at dusk. Told him to go to Winterfell as soon as he could. And then he whispered something in his son's ear that no one else could hear. After which, his son asked Lord Arryn if his father's watch was done. Lord Arryn said yes, it was. And then Lord Alsterdane died. The room fell silent, apart from the noise of the water outside. He will be remembered, Doran muttered after a while. He was a strong voice for the stony Dornish. And a noble one. Where are his bones? On board my ship, my prince. I swore that I would deliver them in all honor to Starfall. And I will honor that promise. He was indeed a good man. And his son. Where is he now? Myros set his chin a little. Riding for Winterfell, my prince. With all dispatch. Doran looked at Oberyn, who looked back at him levelly. Winterfell again, his brother said eventually. The blood of the first men is strong. Oberyn looked back at the captain. Our thanks, Captain Myros. Please, continue on to Starfall with our thanks. And a purse of gold for informing us. Doran gestured at Hotter, who strode forwards, stamped in salute, and then escorted the seaman away. As the pair vanished he looked back at Oberyn. It seems the stony Dornish know something, he said. We must know as much, or more. Chapter 17. Chapter text. Ned. The lad, Edric, was so like his father. Well, apart from the ears, that is. Those were pure Florent. But the rest of him was pure Robert, from his shock of black hair to his blue eyes and his build. He had a warhammer at his back already, a small one, and judging from his muscles he was already practicing hard with it, despite his age. He watched from a bend in the stairs leading down into the main courtyard. Edric was taking lessons from Sir Courtney Penrose, whilst a fascinated Bran and Robert listened to one side. Those two had become as thick as thieves in recent weeks, combining a love of horses with a penetrating need to bombard everyone around them with questions about, well, everything. Hearing feet on the steps near him he looked to one side. Cat was approaching and he smiled and kissed her proffered hand gallantly. The Lord and Lady of Winterfell had to keep up certain niceties. In public at least. In private, well, they both knew that there was a baby coming, but that was not yet cause to stop coupling as much as possible. Kat smiled impishly at him and then looked down at young Edric. She opened her mouth to speak, and then she looked about them to make sure that no one was near. Strange to think that I'd welcome a bastard to Winterfell, she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. When I was growing up I was told to hate and fear bastards of any kind. Because they posed a threat to the trueborn. Father always mentioned the Black Fires. Everyone always held them up as an example. Very true, Ned sighed in response. But this is different. He's a trueborn son of Robert. You just have to look at him. Black of hair and blue of eye. He's Robert in miniature, and wielding a warhammer already. She nodded and then sank into his embrace a little. Just enough to assuage propriety. Do you think that all will one day rest on him? That was a good question, and he paused to think it through for a long moment. We have to act as if it might. At the moment Robert's true heir is Stannis. But he only has one heir, Shireen, and she is a sickly girl. After that it's Renly. And the rumors that Robb said that he'd heard from people, including you, about Renly and his, let's call them preferences, well, let's just say that House Baratheon needs as much support as possible. Her face went still for a long moment. He recognized that look. Oh, no, enough. Do not grieve or worry about decisions you took in a future that will not now happen. You were badly informed. I was apparently juiced to the eyeballs with milk of the poppy by Pycelle in King's Landing, a man who I have never liked as his Tywin Lannister's creature. And Robb was badly advised. There's much that he now knows, that he didn't know before. She whispered. And then a steely look appeared in her eyes. And I mean, Lord Baelish is no longer about to betray us all. I still cannot imagine it. How he could do such a thing. I thought I knew him. He directed a sad look at her. You knew Baelish the boy. You never really knew Baelish the man. From what I have learned, he became bitter and twisted. And the moment that Brandon tried to gut him like a fish, he hated all Starks. The us from that future, we should have seen that. Seen that a mile off. But some fog of madness seems to have clouded our minds. It's gone now. He's dead. We still live. And we must protect our family. She said mistily as she looked at their nephew as he practiced sword strokes with Bran using wooden training swords under the experienced eye of Roderick Castle. Especially from those we thought we loved. I still cannot believe that Lysa did what she did. The guards have been warned. If she somehow comes here, then she will be imprisoned in a cell, and if she sends word to demand Robert, then she will never get an answer. She cannot be trusted. Not with her son, not with anyone. She nodded again and then buried her head in his chest a little further. Is there any word? None. If there had, you would have been the first to know. The last message from King's Landing was that Jon Arryn still lives. How she could attack him. Baelish's poison, he whispered into her hair. His poison. After a moment she straightened up and wiped at her eyes almost angrily. Ned, enough of this. Kat looked down at the courtyard. All the preparations are made. The messages have gone out. They're ready. When? Tomorrow. First light. I'll be there and back before you know it. This earned him a laugh. No, Ned, I'll miss you for every moment you're gone. But you've left me enough to do to keep me busy. Then she sobered. Your plan for the broken tower might not work. But it will still start the repairs needed at the very least. She looked back down at Edric. If we do win at this, if Robert discovers what we know about his children, what if he marries again? He felt his face grow solemn. The long night comes. We fight for the wall. And after that Winterfell, if the wall falls. There's a war coming, the like of which we cannot imagine. Robert needs an heir he can point to as a credible alternative to him if he dies. I care not if it's Stannis or Edric, or some boy yet to be born. But I swear by the old gods that I'll keep that boy alive long enough for Robert to make a choice and to know that he has such a choice available. Kat looked into his eyes for a long moment. I understand, she said seriously. And then she kissed him lingeringly, before descending down the stairs and then talking to Bran and Robert, both of whom looked flushed from exercise. He smiled a little and then strode back up the stairs briskly. There was much to do. Tyrion. The first hint he had that he was no longer alone in the library was a rumbling crash as a book fell off a shelf. Quite a large book by the sound of it. This was followed by the sound of a youthful, and rather familiar, female voice muttering a number of words that Tyrion would have bet quite a number of dragons that her mother would be horrified to know that she knew. There was then a pause, interspersed with the sound of pages being flipped. And then, muttering. Quite a bit of muttering. Tyrion cocked an ear and picked up the occasional word here and there. Like, useless and where's the bit I need, and then bugger it. He pursed his lips in thought for a moment and then carefully closed the book in front of him, having marked the place, before getting down off his chair and padding towards the source of the noise as soundlessly as possible. As he had thought, the source in question was young Arya Stark. She was sitting on a large chair with a huge book in front of her and she was rifling through the pages with a lack of care for the contents that made him wince. After a while she finished, scowled furiously and then slammed the book shut. Useless. What is? Much to his gratification he saw how high she jumped at the sound of those two words. Then she caught sight of him and her eyes widened. The emo. I'm sorry. Lord Tyrion. Sorry. She looked as if she was about to die of embarrassment. You're not enjoying your book then? He asked after a long moment. Arya Stark looked down at the book and then scowled again. What? Oh. No. It's useless. It doesn't contain anything about what I need. He looked at her quizzically and then down at the book. The title, A True History of Ye Legends of Ye North, confused him more than a little. Surely a true history of legends was something of an oxymoron. So he asked the logical question. So what information are you searching for? The girl looked about the room carefully and then bent down a little. I want to know how. Another quick look about the room. How to become a warg. A warg. He said the words carefully, trying them out on both his tongue and his brain. Yes. A warg. My ancestors were wargs. They're in the crypts, with their wolves. He blinked a little. Someone had mentioned that, but he had not gone there just yet. Your half-brother mentioned that you were a warg. Or rather the old gods did through him. He still didn't like remembering that. The red fire in the eyes, the voice, the feeling that he was about to piss himself in terror as something older and vaster than anything he could ever imagine peered at him. The girl all but danced from foot to foot for a moment. I know. The old gods called me young warg. The dancing ceased. But I don't know how to be a warg. None of the books or the legends say anything about it. They're useless. He looked at her for a long moment as he considered a wide range of potential issues. And what he said eventually, would you use any wargish? Is that the right word? Powers for. What would you do as a warg? She looked at him as if he was raving mad. I'd be a warg. Isn't that enough? He sighed and then pulled up a chair and climbed into it. Frankly no. Everything I have read about magic so far tell me that it has a price, that you must have a good reason to practice it. You cannot simply announce that you to walk for the sake of warging. He paused. You seem unconvinced. I have Nymeria. She snapped the words. I could walk into her. And then I could bite Sansa on the ass. At which point she blushed more than a bit. That sounded wrong, didn't it? Very likely. Let me ask you a different question. Surely you wouldn't want to hurt Nymeria, would you? Arya Stark frowned and then shook her head furiously. Of course not. Starks of old were wargs and didn't hurt their direwolves. Why would I? Besides, that's what I'm looking for. Information on how to warg, safely. Her angry expression softened a little. She relies on me. And I'd never hurt her. Tyrion looked at her for a moment. All of a sudden he needed a large goblet of wine. You obviously haven't asked your father about this, as he would have forbidden it. Then I suggest that you keep reading and make sure that you put all the books away afterwards. In the right places. Otherwise Maester Lewin will be irked. She looked rather alarmed at that, and then, hearing the sound of footsteps to one side, she darted away and vanished in the stacks. Tyrion sighed and then looked at the doorway, where Lewin was standing. Maester Lewin. Lord Tyrion. The Maester approached the table and then looked at the books there. After a moment he moved his head to one side slightly and then he sighed. I see that Lady Arya has been in here again, looking for a big book that tells me how to be a warg. Someone left out a harumph not too far away, quickly silenced, and the two men smiled at each other for a moment, before the Maester smiled wistfully. She is Lyanna Stark come again, Lord Tyrion. I knew her only briefly, but the same fire that burnt in her burns just as bright in young Arya. I would not want to be the man who is fated to get close to that fire, Tyrion muttered. Then he looked back at the Maester and at the book he was carrying. And what do you have there, Maester Lewin? A book that I thought might interest you, Lord Tyrion. It was amongst the books and other writings that we found in Lord Stark's Solar, a book that I have only recently discovered. He held it out, a thin, slim volume that looked as if it was hundreds of years old. It contains notes written by the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch of some 200 years ago. About the time of the abandonment of the Night Fort. Not his journal that has been missing for many years. But the notes themselves are singular. They hint at more information, possibly hidden at Castle Black. And the name of that Lord Commander. Lord Tyrion, does the name Tyrk Lannister mean anything to you? I have a cousin of that name, Tyrion said slowly. But there was also once a younger brother of an ancestor of mine, about 30 years before the Dance of the Dragons. I think he joined the Night's Watch. There's a bit of a blank spot in the family history that I read when it comes to that bit, to be honest. Lewin's lips thinned for a moment. The honor of serving in the Night's Watch was fading by that point, I'm afraid. Especially in the great houses of the South, as King's Landing grew in influence and power and splendor. He spat that last word. Then he made a slight gesture of apology. Your pardon, Lord Tyrion. Here in the North. Well, we have long been used to how little the South thinks of the war. He thought about the reports that had been arriving of the descendants of the first men sending help to the war, as well as the arrival of the clans from the Vale, and smiled a little. I think that you'll find that has changed, Maester Lewin. It has. Well, you need to read this. The Maester turned to a particular page and handed the book over. Tyrion looked at it with a frown. Lord Commander Tyrk Lannister, having ordered the abandonment of the Night Fort, due to the growing enfeeblement of the Night's Watch, have ordered that certain chests containing document and other artifacts pertaining to the secrets be concealed there. Lord Stark is to be kept informed of this. And when the time comes to reclaim the Night Fort, as I have foreseen, then the second son, short of stature but great of intellect, of the proud lion will go there to reclaim what is his and to help open the Black Gate for the Wanderer. Invisible and seemed to crawl up and down his spine for a moment. After a while he looked up at the older man. This all makes it sounds dreadfully obvious that very thick underwear and a lot of furs lie in my immediate future. It was a weak jape, but the best he could manage in the circumstances. I think, Lord Tyrion, that you must join Lord Stark and the Lords of the North at Castle Black. I think, Maester Lewin, that you are very right about that. He sighed. This was not going to be a pleasant trip, he suspected. It would instead be fast and arduous. And what was he going to reclaim? Varys. He sat there and forced his fingers to be still as he read the message. He prided himself on his ability to be calm and still, and he needed to be so now more than ever. It was just that, he couldn't quite bring himself to believe it. Illyrio Patis, a man who had forgotten more about fighting due to his time as a bravo than Varys could ever possess, was dead. Killed by an insane Viserys Targaryen. Or rather attacked by Viserys Targaryen before they both fell into a fire. A shudder ripped through him. How had this happened? What had driven the boy over the edge so quickly? It had taken dusk and ale to start Aerys' descent into madness. What had driven Viserys mad? His nickname of the Beggar King. His poverty. The dragon egg that Illyrio had given him and which he had started to regret. He stood abruptly and then took the message over to the nearest candle and burnt it. As the parchment crackled and burnt, he stared into the flames for a long moment. Fire. Such a destructive thing. But it had its uses. His career had been partly founded on it. Few knew this, but Aerys Targaryen hadn't just brought him to Westeros to spy for him. There had been another reason. Summerhall. Aerys hadn't believed that the tragedy had been an accident. And unless he very much missed his guess, Aerys had been right. It had been hard to ascertain the facts. Too much time had passed to get to the exact truth, the exact culprits. Too many questions. Why was it that the dragons had diminished in size? Why had the line of dragons failed? Why had the dragon law failed the Targaryens? That much he did not know. So, then, why choose Summerhall as the place to rebirth dragons? Why not Dragonstone? The latter had a volcano, warm tunnels and all the accoutrements needed to breed dragons. What did Summerhall have? It had been totally under the control of the royal family. It should have been a safe, controlled environment. It should have been perfect. Instead it had turned into an inferno that had claimed a king, a prince and the lives of umpteen others. And why? He suspected the Maesters. Why? Because they were not keen on magic or on dragons. They were an affront to their tidy world of books and facts. He understood that and he had some sympathy for it. Magic was too unpredictable, too wild, with costs that few understood. He knew, however. Knew all too well. He'd brought his findings to Aerys, only to have more tasks thrown at him. Who was plotting against the king? Who wanted Aerys dead? What was Tywin Lannister doing? Why was his son, Rhaegar, learning how to fight all of a sudden? Paranoia had burnt bright in the breast of the king. And beyond the paranoia lay madness. Increasingly severe madness. The more he thought about, the more he'd wondered about if his own actions had contributed to it. Aerys had thought many things, mostly about disloyalty all around him. Every lord had been under suspicion. Even Tywin Lannister. 1,000 little things that ordinarily meant nothing had combined until Tywin Lannister had no longer been trusted. And then, after Aerys had humiliated Tywin with Rhaegar's marriage to Elia Martell instead of Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister's enrollment in the Kingsguard, the king's oldest friend had been utterly alienated and had resigned and returned to Casterly Rock in a high dudgeon. That had only increased Aerys' paranoia. Everyone was now plotting against him. Varys had had only one real major success after this point, the discovery that some kind of plot against the king might be discussed between a number of Lords Paramount and Rhaegar at the great tourney at Harrenhal. Even then that success had been a mixed one. All attending the tourney had been horrified at his appearance, long, unkempt hair, long nails, eyes like red coals in the snow. And even after that Aerys still sank even deeper into paranoia and madness. Which had led to the crowning madness of what had happened to Rickard and Brandon Stark. He'd known, right there and then, that disaster would follow. As one burnt to death and the other choked on his own blood, he'd known that the Targaryens were, eventually, doomed. That brought back more bad memories. Aerys had always been odd about wildfire. After the deaths of the Starks, well, he'd become even more obsessed by it, if such a thing was possible. Watching him as people burned to death in front of him, as he giggled and then poured at his sister wife, well, it had been the nastiest, riskiest period of his life. He'd been running on the edge of a knife the entire time. Knowing that one misstep could kill him. It had grown worse after the news came of disaster at the Trident. Rhaegar dead, his army scattered, the rebels advancing rapidly, no friendly forces anywhere near, lord after lord turning their coat, the court filled with whispers and long silences. Aerys had killed messengers bearing bad news and traitors. At one point he'd even screamed to burn the ravens, until Pycelle had somehow persuaded him that the birds were loyal. That had been a surreal conversation to overhear. And then it had all come to an end. Tywin Lannister's betrayal, the deaths of those members of the royal family in the Red Keep. He often wondered about the final details of that. There had been rumors of some kind of plot that Aerys had been working on, something that had involved wildfire. The reports about the causes of the resignation and death of Lord Carlton Chelstead were highly suspicious. He had tried to find out more, but Aerys had always made it perfectly clear that Varys should never ever spy on him. Not if he wanted to live. Looking back, he wished that he had had his current flock of little birds in place back then. He'd been young and callow back then. Well, younger. He'd known what had driven Aerys' obsession with wildfire though. It ran in the family. Aerion Targaryen had died screaming after drinking a cup of the substance, thinking that it would transform him into a dragon. He had always wondered if Aerys had thought the same thing. Dragons. It always came back to dragons. And now, almost to make a mockery of it all, Summer Hall, the desperate desire of kings long dead for dragons, the petty whims of her father, the rebellion, and so on, Daenerys Targaryen was now the mother to 3 dragons. He winced a little and then paced about the room. The problem was that he had no idea what to do at the moment, not really. He had crafted a plan with Illyrio and Connington, with the connivance of the Martells, a plan that had a reasonable chance of success. Robert Baratheon had been a terrible king so far. Grief had hollowed him out and he'd tried to fill the void with wine, food and women. It hadn't worked. The boy Aegon would make a better king. He was controllable, well-educated and free of the taint of Targaryen madness. Or he would have. Suddenly the game board was changed, the pieces moving in different ways from those that had before. Perhaps this was an old form of the board, an ancient one. Had the first men had a Game of Thrones? Of course they had, it was as old as time itself. But there must have been times when it was placed into abeyance perhaps. Times like now. The call had changed everything. The eyes of many men with the blood of the first men were not on King's Landing, but rather on Winterfell. And the war. He could see it all so clearly now. It had taken time. He'd had to clear his mind of more than a few layers of disbelief, more than a few illusions that he had cherished about the world and the way that he had thought that it worked. So many people had changed their ways. So many things had been found. Stormbreaker had not been the first, he knew that. Ned Stark held something as well. And there had been rumors about the Tullis. And then there were the other things. The Blackfish had been seen heading towards the God's Eye. Something odd was happening there. Fighting was one thing, but there were also reports of men and women dressed in green, with antlered hoods. The green men were stirring for the first time in centuries. Something was happening at Raventree Hall, something to do with the supposedly dead heart tree there. Something old was stirring, something ancient even by the standards of Essos. He knew that. Anyone who didn't was an idiot. The Queen was just such an idiot. Of all the players in the game she was the least likely to recognize that the game had changed. That King Robert was changing before her very eyes. The demon of the trident was sloughing off years of fat and inertia, a man with a purpose once more. Why did it have to be her as a player in the game? She was a sad shadow of her father. He was a challenge. She was not. She thought she was clever and she wasn't. She thought she was subtle and cunning. She was, in reality, as subtle as a brick. And any cunning she had was that of a desperate rat. That said, even desperate rats could kill. At least Baelish was gone from the game. He had always known that he was a threat, but the true nature of that threat had only become apparent after his death. The list of people he had bribed, the number of men and women suborned, he had suspected that the list had been long but had been quietly stunned at just how long. And for what? What had Baelish been striving for? Even now he didn't understand it. He pinched the bridge of his nose for a moment. The king would be sailing for the north in an hour. King's Landing was all astir. What to do? Stay or go to Pentos? Daenerys Stormborn was now a major player in the game. The rules were different in Westeros, but in Essos there were certainties. The Magisters would treat her well, with great hospitality, and then they would start asking questions about her intentions. Would she be willing to use her dragons once they were grown, of course on Bravos? Oh, yes, they'd sell their souls to her for the chance to use those dragons on their hated enemy. And on anyone else. Perhaps Volantis after Bravos. Stay or go? Forgo the changed game here for the game that he was familiar with in Pentos. He had to make a decision, and soon. Stay. Or go. Asher. There were 3 dead men at the entrance to the harbour at 10 Towers. All had been drowned men. All had been hanged. She stared at them as the black wind sailed past the point and then onto the long stone quay. And then she sighed. Oh, she could feel it in the air now. War. Strife. She shook her head for a moment. Dale was waiting for her at the quay, whittling on a piece of wood. Judging by the shape, it appeared to be a miniature tree. Odd. "He's at High Harlaw again," the man drawled as he jabbed his knife at one of the little shaggy horses that were tethered nearby. "Wants to see you. Has news." Asher stared at him. "News?" Dale nodded and then started carving again. "News." Then he looked up. "Men on the point are Damfair's men. Your nuncle caught them ranting about him." No one was listening. "Then they tried to draw steel." "Bad idea." She raised her eyebrows at that, before nodding and then mounting the horse and riding it up on the long winding road that led to High Harlaw. And as she rode she noted again how much was happening around her. Men were sowing fields, whilst others cleared brush. The Iron Islands had long since lost their great trees, but there were still the odd sapling here and there. Farming was a hard task on the Iron Islands. Here on Harlaw they were making every effort at making it work. It worried her. When she finally reached High Harlaw, her mind dark with worry, she found her Uncle Roderick in a makeshift study, a table piled high with books next to him. He was talking to a woman with long black hair who must have been about 10 years older than her. From the way that they smiled at each other, Asher realized that the two were close. Very close. Odd. He'd never spoken about anyone other his late wife before. Who was she? He caught sight of her and an odd look crossed his face, a combination of surprise, guilt and determination. "Asher, well met," he called out. "I would like you to meet someone. This is Alice." "Lady Asher," Alice said, her voice low and polite. "I have heard much about you. But I have heard little of you," Asher blurted, before blushing a little. "Nuncle. Your pardon. Alice and I have known each other for some years now. We had an understanding." There was an odd expression to use, unless he meant that she had had a husband who was old or infirm or was in his dotage. He cleared his throat. "We were married 2 days ago." She stared at them both. Her nuncle had never ever mentioned the possibility of him marrying again. Her face must have reflected everything she was thinking, because after a long moment he smiled ruefully. "I wanted to hide Alice from your father's attention. And Damfair. I wanted to keep her safe. Especially as she, well. I heard the call very loudly," Alice said with a quiet strength. "And my family does not worship the drowned god." Ice trickled up and down her spine for a moment. "I am come from old Wyk," she said hoarsely. "And the Stoner brows there. They deny the drowned god as well. As do many others." Nuncle Roderick went still for a long moment as he and his new wife both stared at her. "The Stoner brows. What of them?" She sat in the nearest chair and pulled the stone out of a pocket. "They asked if you were awake yet. They asked why you have not yet sent for the stone." Alice merely looked puzzled, but her nuncle went as white as a sheet. "The stone. I didn't know." He caught their looks at him and abruptly stood, before pacing back and forth for a moment. Then he stopped and looked at them both. "When my grandfather lay dying he sent for me. He made very little sense, but what he did say has always stayed with me. He said that one day the Stoner brows would send word. That one day the stone would be returned and the Harlaws could see things clearly again. And then he died. I never knew what he meant, and my father said that the words meant nothing, but now." His eyes turned to the stone. "Who gave you that?" "Elis Stonerbrow. My childhood nurse. She said that it would help you to read the runes. That Harlaws were overly clever and that perhaps you were not told about the runes and the stone. But she gave it to me anyway. Said that it would answer your questions. Once you placed it at the start of the runes." She hefted it thoughtfully and then carefully handed it over to him. Her uncle stared at it for a long moment and then he clenched it in his hand. "Very well. Let us see what this will do." As they all stood and walked across the room to the door that led to the corridor and the stairs, he seemed to recollect something. "Oh, your brother has written to me. A number of most interesting letters." Theon had written. "Interesting in what way?" Nuncle Roderick paused as he took a burning torch from a wall bracket. "Interesting as in what?" he asked. "He asked about the Greyjoy rebellion. About your father's motives and strategy. And he asked a very good question." "What question?" If your father was an idiot or not. Not in those exact words of course, but from the way he phrased it I suspect that he's guessed the truth. Asher pulled a face. She'd wondered at times just what kind of a life Theon had in Winterfell. He'd been a proud boy from what she remembered of him. Nicer than their older brothers, but still proud and oddly needy. What was he like now? She had no idea, but from the sound of things. What else did he ask? Questions about the history of the Iron Islands. Questions about the drowned god. Oh, and something odd if there were any legends about people dreaming about an island made of bones. An island made of bones. She laughed. Why would someone dream of anything like that? I know not, and yet it's an oddly specific question, is it not? She thought about as they passed down the stairs leading to the corridor and then slowly nodded. Mayhaps, she said reluctantly. But what did he mean? I have written back to him to ask, her uncle replied as they reached the corridor and strode towards the room where the light still feebly flickered. Especially for more details about the call. You see, your brother was there when Ned Stark sent it out. He was there, Asher. No mummery. He was there. And his letter on it was sobering. They trooped into the room and Asher stared at the flickering runes with disquiet. She suddenly had the oddest feeling that her life was about to change in ways that she did not understand. I must read that letter, she said in a hoarse voice. We need more information on what happened. Nuncle Roderick was peering at the wall where the runes started, and then he gave a surprised grunt. There is a place for this, he muttered as he lifted the burning brand closer to the wall. Asher looked closely and could suddenly see a depression in the wall next to the first line. The reader reached out his hand and after juggling it around a few times hesitantly finally slid the stone into the wall. Nothing happened for a long moment, and just as she was starting to almost hope that this was all a mistake, something flared within the stone, as if a part of the sun had been trapped in its heart and was now making a bid for freedom. Brighter and brighter it shone, and then suddenly the lines through the runes seemed to shimmer and fade, and the runes themselves suddenly blazed with light, so much so that Asher and the others all raised their hands to their eyes for a long moment as the room seemed to almost shake with something that she couldn't describe. When she opened her eyes again and peeked through her fingers, she gasped. The light had diminished, but it was still clear, and she looked about the walls in astonishment. The runes could now be read. All of them. Nuncle Roderick and Alice were already at the wall where the runes started, reading and muttering to each other as what certain runes meant, and she watched them for a moment. Those two seemed a good match. They were both fascinated by the runes. Then she frowned. The other two were silent now, and as she watched they continued to read the runes but grew more and more pale by the moment. Now the looks were filled with shock and even perhaps horror. In fact, Nuncle Roderick was more than pale as he reached the end wall. He was grey and his hands shook as if he was about to have an apoplexy. Asher, bring wine and a cup at once. The command came from Alice, who was watching him worriedly, and even though she was not used to taking orders from anyone, Asher ran when she heard that note of command, ran as if her life depended on it. Up the stairs she dashed, along the corridor and into the room where she had met the others. There was a jug of wine on the table, with a stopper in the top, along with a couple of rather battered goblets, and she grabbed them all and returned, trying to hurry at the stairs but not to break her neck. She found them both by the door, still pale and wan, but Nuncle Roderick's hands had stopped shaking. That said, they both fell upon the wine with grim but thankful looks at her. Both swallowed a goblet of wine almost in an instant, and then they both stared at the runes again. I never dreamed, Alice muttered, only to be cut off by Nuncle Roderick. No one did. No one could. This is as bad as I had feared. We must guard this room with our lives, because our lives depend on it. Damn fair, if he knew what was said in these runes then he would kill anyone who read them, before burning this place down to the bedrock to destroy it. Alice muttered shakily. That he would. But what now? Nuncle Asher broke in. What do they say? You acted like a man suffering from a palsy when you read them. There was a pause as the other looked at each other. And then her nuncle directed a long and intense look at her that made her feel deeply uneasy. She'd seen that look on his face before, but directed at others. It was the look he gave people that he was measuring up. Are you sure you want to know? He asked the question in a low and intent voice. You will not be the same after I tell you what the runes say. You may never be the same ever again. She looked at him and then at the runes and then again back at him. Tell me. He paused for a moment and then he nodded, before handing his knife over to Alice. Guard the door if you please. We must not be overheard. She nodded back choppily and then went over to the entrance. Asher watched all of this with a deepening unease, before looking at her nuncle as he walked back to the start of the runes and then gesturing at her to join him. These runes, he said in a low and intent voice, were carved by my ancestor. It says so, here. And his hand gestured at a section of runes. The Harlaw, it says. It's an older name than I ever dared consider. Rune Speaker, or Rune Carver is the translation, I think. And it tells a terrible tale. He took a deep and shuddering breath into his lungs for a moment and then let it out again. The old gods are many. And there was once an additional one. But this one was twisted. Became twisted. Was wrong. Became obsessed with death in the fight against the others, until he went, well, mad. Nuncle Roderick gestured at another part of the wall. The old gods, they tried to bring him back, but it was too late. The madness took hold and would not let him go. Death and coldness and madness, the madness of chaos. That was all he came to care about. All he desired. His hand went to another part of a different wall. So they cast him out, he said in a voice like ashes. Out into the darkness of the sea and the abyss that lies below it, populated by cold and terrible things that we know not. The old gods rejected him and condemned him to death in that darkness. But how can you kill a god? They both succeeded and failed. Succeeded in driving him away but failed in killing him. It sent him into that final pit of madness and despair, all so close to death. Not that that worried his followers. And he did have followers. Dark souls amongst the first men, they were, bitter and twisted themselves. They fled the mainland to follow his spirit. Because, as they said, what is dead can never die, but rises again harder and stronger. She whispered the words in total horror. She felt cold all of a sudden, cold and clammy, and she heard the glugging noise as he filled a goblet with wine and thrust it into her unresisting hands. Drink. It was a command that she could not disobey, and she gulped down every drop before coughing a little. Not a fine vintage, but it mattered not. Nuncle, she started to say in a voice filled with despair. This time he overrode her. The runes are clear, Asher. Very clear. That's why they must have been hidden. They tell of the fall of the drowned god and the arrival of his followers in these islands. They came here and they slowly converted or subverted the first men here. Until they controlled what became the Iron Islands. And could openly worship their mad god. The last words were said as if they pained him. The old way, the Iron-born way. It feeds him, or what's left of him. Death, destruction, rape, pain, mutilation. Don't look at me like that, Asher. You know what your uncle Euron was noted for before his banishment. From the reports I've heard of him, he's still a monster. He ran his hands over his face as if wiping something away. Farge. Well now. As I said, the room must be guarded. I will copy the tale that the runes tell. He paused. There is something else. The runes say, well, they say that the end of the drowned god will come when the Stark in Winterfell wields his fist against him. In one of Theon's letters, well, he wrote that Ned Stark had found something in Winterfell. The weapon of his ancestors. A mace. It has a name. The Fist of Winter. She needed another mug of wine after this. If she had been horror-struck before, she was now terrified. What will happen? She asked the question in a faint, low voice. I will send word of this discovery to various people. Lords that I trust absolutely, here on Harlaw. I think I must also send word to the Stonerbrows, to say that the Harlaw is awake. And then, well, I think you know what I must do. Will you stand with me or against me? She looked at the runes again and then saw the look that her nuncle was giving her. There was concern in it, but also an implacable will. She knew that he would always do the right thing. No matter what it cost. But she also knew something else. Old WYK had changed something in her, and now this room had pushed her again. It was still an agonizing decision to make. Nuncle Roderick would be fighting Damfair. She cared not what happened to Damfair, as he was a religious lunatic with blood all over his hands. But he was also a cunning beast. And he had the ear of father. But then was father any better, really? Was he wise in planning to attack the north in revenge for his defeat? Was he really an idiot? And what would happen with Theon? She swallowed. And then she made her choice. I stand with you, Jon Arryn. The darkness was smothering him. Every time he thought that he was clawing his way out of it, it pulled him back down again, down into those black depths. He dreamed in that blackness, dark and terrible dreams. The ruin of the realm, the death of his son, the deaths of Robert and Ned, the deaths of his kith and kin. He relived the deaths of all that had been close to him, and saw again Denai's fall at the Battle of the Bells, to the sword of Connington. And then there was Lysa. She was always there, somewhere, dressed in blackness, her face twisted and her dagger ready. That was the worst dream of all. She killed him again and again. She killed young Robert and then blamed him. She blamed him for everything. And there was blood. Blood everywhere. Dark dreams. And then, something shifted. Robert. He could hear Robert. He was faint, he sounded strained but as if he was trying to be cheerful. He was leaving for the north. Leaving to find out what was going on. Leaving for Winterfell. A raven had arrived from Ned. Young Robert was doing well, flourishing. Learning to ride a horse apparently. Robert faded away and the dreams took him again. The Battle of the Bells again. And then the Ruby Ford, only this time Rhaegar won. Robert went down, his massive form slumping into the water, the great warhammer broken. He had been too late again, always too late, his legs too slow, his frame too old, his mind too feeble. Wait. What had Robert said? Learning to ride a horse. It rang through him and pushed him up out of the darkness. His son needed him. An Arryn should ride a horse. An Arryn should know of the Knights of the Vale and how to fight. He clawed his way up, exhausted but still trying. Up from the shadows, out from the darkness. The dreams chased him, clawed at him, flailed him with shards of bitter memory and terrible nightmare. Failed, came the words, failed. You have failed the realm. The voice sounded like Baelish, and that was another reason to fight, to claw out of the darkness. He was never going to let that piece of filthy thieving scum win, not now. His shade might slither out from the seven hells, but if needed he'd kill even that oozing remnant. No, Baelish would not win. Sounds began to filter through the thick cloth that seemed to be wrapped around him. Someone talking. Pycelle. And Quill. He struggled again, the cloth tearing and ripping as he struggled to get through it. Robert needed him. The realm needed him. No, his son needed him. It felt as if every part of him had been dipped in lead, so great was the struggle to move, but at long last he finally managed to crack an eyelid open. He felt exhausted and hungry, but that was as nothing to the thirst. His throat was parched. He looked about as much as one half-open eyelid would allow. There was someone moving on the other side. A man. Yes, a man. A maester and a young one. He looked as if he was reading something. It once again took a massive effort, but after a long moment he was finally able to make a noise. It was little more than a gargle, but the maester's head shot up as if he had shouted at him. My lord. The man stood and peered at him. Lord Arryn. Was that you? A nod of infinite slowness, but it was enough to get the maester buzzing around him. You are awake. Can you hear me? Oh, this is most welcome news. Perhaps that last poultice helped. What was in it again? I need to consult my notes. He opened both eyes and glared at the man properly, who finally fell silent. What do you need, my lord? Wah, tr. Dr. Ink. The maester cursed at himself and then poured a glass of what looked well-watered wine and then carefully brought it to his lips. It was like nectar. He gulped every drop with increasing strength, before leaning back weakly. Quill. The maester nodded and then hurried to the door. Quill. He barked the name earnestly. Lord Arryn is awake. The door burst open and faithful Quill ran in, straight to his bed. My lord. He struggled to more than smile. Then he finally found the strength. Quill. How long have I slept? Many days, my lord. Many days. Quill looked terrible, thin-faced and gaunt. I have lost count. Water, more, water. My lord, Quill barked, before jumping to the nearest pitcher. Another glass of watered wine and he felt fresh strength enter his body. My lord, the maester said carefully. Do you remember who attacked you? His chest heaved for a moment as the grief stabbed through him. He licked his lips slowly, chasing the last morsels of moisture. Lysa. Lady. Arin. Quill and the maester exchanged looks, one of fury and one of weary acceptance. We thought as much, my lord, Quill said eventually. Your dagger was found with blood on it and she was seen fleeing the city with an injured arm. He swallowed the pain and the grief and then focused on what was foremost on his mind. Robert. He had to be told. The great matter, he had tarried too long on it. What if he had died? It would have been left to Stannis to tell his brother, and whilst Stannis Baratheon was a good and dutiful man, he and Robert had never gotten on that well. They were too dissimilar at times whilst being similar at other times. I must see the king. His grace. This time the two men exchanged looks of deep bemusement. I fear you are some hours too late, my lord, Quill said, and terror spiked through his mind. Had the Lannisters moved so quickly? Had Cersei manipulated her way against Robert? How so? His grace has sailed for the north. To meet with Lord Stark. Relief filled him. Not too late then. Not too late to secure King's Landing. Who has acted in my stead? Quill looked down at his feet for a moment. His grace said that he needed a full-time hand, my lord. The new hand of the king is Lord Stannis Baratheon. He has not left yet, but he is scheduled to do so. Something about dealing with unrest in the Riverlands. Relief was replaced by wonder. Gods be good, had Robert started to mend the breach with his brother? And done something sensible? Then, ask the hand to attend me. Then he sniffed. He stank. But first, a bath. And food. Quill nodded and left, barking commands at guards as he went. He watched him go and then set his jaw. There was much to be done. The realm needed him. As did his son. Robb. Young Ed looked worried as he slipped through the hole in the hedge and then scurried over to the men as they sat by the small fire in the pre-dawn darkness. And his first words sent a shiver of dread through him. They've arrived. He looked up from his task of sharpening his sword. How many? I counted 40 of them. 5 more were talking to old Blackfyet. Hey! The name for the Mad Septon had taken after all. He frowned a little. That man was no Septon, not a real one. Anyone who roused small folk to do evil things in the name of the Seven was going against the words of the Seven. Home. There were times when he wondered just which road he might have taken if he hadn't heard the call and been drawn here to the God's Eye and the good people that were here. Did you hear what they were talking about to him? Their leader was asking about what needed to be done. Apparently we're all pagans who need to be thrown into the arms of the stranger. The other men laughed a little and muttered insults, but he could tell how tense they all were now. They'd been lucky so far. Old Blackfyet had the tactical instincts of a small child at times. He had sent his faithful 3 times down the road that them now, all armed with as motley a collection of weapons as he could imagine. He and the villagers had ambushed them each and every time with volleys of arrows. The man around here, and many of the women, were good hunters and could use their bows well. They'd gone after different game this time and they had made Blackfyet's faithful have second, third and fourth thoughts about going anywhere near the village, the only place in the area that had boats. It hadn't been all one-sided though. The faithful had bows of their own and they'd used them. And last time they'd used their numbers to try and press home, to charge them. He'd killed 5 of them himself, messily and very visibly, before they had broken again and ran. They'd left 5 villagers dead behind them and another 10 wounded. And the village couldn't lose any more men. And now old Blackfyet had more recruits. Hedge knights. Men with armor. Are they mounted? They are. Well, fuck. Aim for the horses then. He ran a weary hand over his face. And we use the hedges as much as possible. If we can get them to charge home across Warrenfield, then they might lose some of their numbers to holes in the ground. He was reaching a bit now, but he had to show confidence. Young Ed nodded and then looked at them. Any word from the Isle? Nothing new. Old Ed went off with Lake Sprite just after dusk. No word of him since. He nodded. Then he looked at Robb. Will they sing songs of us, do you think? That depended on the matter of any of them surviving. Perhaps, lad. Perhaps. A silence fell. It isn't right. They can't win. They're in the wrong. He sighed and laid a hand on the lad's shoulder. Ed, there are times when evil men win and good men lose. This isn't a song. The songs leave the bad bits out, like evil winning over good. All we can do is fight the best that we can. We have to protect the village and the island. They can't get to it. Not the Isle of Faces. It's the last true place where the green men still reside. All we can do is our best. He paused. All we can do is our best, he repeated softly. He stared into the fire. They'd need the few precious spears they had. And they'd have to hope that the hedge knights were led by an idiot. But somehow he knew that they probably weren't. He was right, he thought an hour later as he stared at the road leading down to the village. The hedge knights were in a line on the left-hand side of the road, away from the hedges and not on the side that held all those lovely rabbit holes. They had already sent a few scouts out into the copse to one side, the one that was just over the hill. Fortunately he'd pulled his men back from there already. Too obvious. No, this was going to be a battle of horsemen with demented idiots at their back against a grim pack of men and women with spears and bows. And they didn't have enough spears, and despite the best efforts of the Fletchers they were running short of arrows. Archers, aim for the horses. We bring some of them down and they might bring others down. Spearmen, stay together. Horses will not charge spears. Not if you hold firm. Swordsmen, axemen, when they flank us, aim at the eyes of the horses. Cruel, but the more they rear the less their riders can fight. We stand here. We fight here. Grim nods greeted these words. And the words that were unsaid. We die here. The hedge knights didn't bother with a parley. They started to trot down the hill towards them, their leader at the front. He gritted his teeth and stared at the man. He was in old plate armor that looked as if it had been made before the first Black Fur rebellion, and his shield was red with 7 white stars painted on it. Yes, the faith militant. Steady, he warned. Archers, stand ready. They came on. He watched them come on, measuring distances in his head. He was distantly aware that someone was shouting his name somewhere behind him, but he ignored the noises. He had to wait until, now. Loose. 20 bows sang almost one, and a score of arrows flew through the air and into the horsemen. Perhaps 5 of them hit, and at least 1 horse went down in a flail of hooves and blood. Not good enough, he thought, not good enough. He opened his mouth again. Who was it back there who kept calling name? But before he could order another volley, a horn blew to his left. Bold and brassy, and a challenge to all that heard it, and then horsemen poured past the copse. He gaped at the galloping newcomers. They were all dressed in green cloaks, with what looked like chainmail armor. One of them held a spear with a banner on it, a banner of a white tree with red leaves on a green background. And they were led by a trio of riders. 2 looked familiar, and he stared at them in shock. The Blackfish and that strange tall young woman. And the third was a tall man in what looked like plate armor with a helm that had horns on it. He stared. Was that the king? Wait, no, there were no Baratheon colors on him, and there were no Kingsguard. There were only 20 of them, but they were at full gallop now, spears and swords glittering in the sunlight. The leader of the hedge knights had seen the newcomers and was trying to get his men to turn, but it was hard to turn at a gallop. The green men slammed into the side of the hedge knights and all was chaos. Hedge knights fell under sword and spear, and the green men pressed home with a grim intensity. Behind them the crowd of faithful had stopped in shock. The leader of the hedge knights had turned his horse and then spurred at the tall man with the horns, recognizing that this was the leader. But as he raised his sword, the horned man moved just as quickly. He parried the blow almost effortless and then whipped out a backslash to the throat that left the man reeling out of the fight, red liquid sheeting down over his chest plate, before falling from the horse lifelessly. That broke the hedge knights, or rather the few that remained. The Blackfish had killed at least 3 or 4 of them and the blonde women had matched him body for body. As the hedge knights galloped away, the horned man held up a clenched fist and the green men rallied around him. A few looked as if they were injured, but none seriously. The crowd of faithful gaped at the horseman and then another horn sounded and more appeared from the left again, banners snapping in the wind. The crowd started to waver and then the horned man stood up in his stirrups, threw back his head and roared. It was not a loud noise, or it didn't seem so, but he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The crowd fled. 1 minute they were staring at the man and the next they were running as fast as they could, leaving whatever they were holding behind him. Some of the green men had unslung bows and were sending shafts into the chests of the few men who were trying to rally the faithful, no small thing, from the back of a horse, and as he watched the last of the rabble vanished off into the distance. It was only then that he realized that he had been standing there like an idiot, before letting out a shout of exultation. The others stared at him and then joined in, relief on all of their faces. It was then that he saw old Ed approach, his face wreathed in smiles. "I was trying to find you." The older man grinned at him. "I got them over as fast as I could. Me and old Timmons, and everyone else they could find to haul a sail. The wind was kind to us. Just as he said it would be. The green man, that is. Him there." He nodded, his heart suddenly too full for words, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And then he saw the Blackfish approach, leading his horse, with that blonde woman in armor next to him. "Still alive then, Robb? Still alive? Good to see you, Sir Bryndon. You brought friends then?" He looked at the other man and noticed that he was wearing a green cloak as well. So was she. And they both had cloak pins in the shape of horns. "You found what you were looking for then?" The Blackfish exchanged a long glance with the woman. Brian, that was her name. He'd only ever heard it the once and it had been what felt like an age and a half ago. Yes, Brian. Brian of Tarth. He could see young Ed staring at her with admiration and not a little fear as she cleaned her blade on a cloth. "Oh, we found a great deal on the Isle of Faces," the Blackfish said wryly. "A lot of green men for a start." He looked at him again. "How bad was it here?" "Not as bad as it could have been. They weren't expecting us to fight, not really. And that Septon leading them, well, he was no soldier. If he's with the dead then you'll know him by his black feet. As dirty as his soul. He used them to better his standing. Or he intended to. But we lost good people here. A score dead and wounded, all told. They will be remembered. Remembered as the green men go forth for the first time in many a long century. There is much that needs tending, some in very unlikely places." The words came from the man with the horned helmet as he walked his horse up to them. As he dismounted, Robb realized that he was old, very old. How did he have the strength to wear that armor? And then he took his helm off. No. It couldn't be. He remembered seeing him once from a distance. You are the green man." "But surely. I was once a different man," the green man said with a sigh. "Yes. I was once Sir Duncan the Tall. T was an age ago now, or so it feels like. Before I found a different duty." He straightened a little. "I have one last campaign within me. One last battle to push back the night. Now you are Robb Glovet. Sir Bryndon spoke of you. Spoke highly of you, as have others. And you have done well here. You have protected these people against fearful odds." The green man drew his sword. "So kneel." He sank to one knee in a daze. The sword touched one shoulder and then the other lightly. "Rise, Sir Robb. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed." John Stark. He found Robb in the Godswood, sitting in front of the heart tree with ice on his lap. He was staring at the bared blade, an odd expression on his face, as if he had never seen the weapon before. As John approached he seemed to return from some faraway place in his mind, before looking up. "John." "Robb. Father sent me to find you. It's almost time." Robb nodded and then he smiled wryly at the blade. Peculiar to have a blade that you can clean and polish but never have to sharpen ever again. There are times when I look at it and barely know what to do with it. I've seen father wield it so many times, but to hold it is beyond words. He looked around carefully and then sat down next to Robb. But surely, he said softly, you must have wielded it in that other time. Robb shook his head. No, he said in just as low a voice. Father took ice with him when he went south to King's Landing. And I never saw it again. The Lannisters kept it. When I fought it was with an ordinary blade. Shock roiled through him. The thought of ice in the hands of anyone who was not a Stark. But it's not just that I was thinking about. It's all the faces I see here at Winterfell that were dead in that other time. Not just father. Lewin. Jory Castle. Roderick Castle. Septa Mordane. Hayes. Will. They all went south with father or they died here in Winterfell. And yet here they are now, alive and well. I feel like a ghost from the future at times, a future we can't allow to happen. He spent a long moment trying to imagine what it would be like to not have the people that his brother had listed alive. It was not something he liked to consider. Roderick Castle and Lewin were two of the rocks that Winterfell was built upon. And Jory was a good friend. They all were. Even the Septa, well, she always meant well. Oh, there are other things, Robb sighed as he stared off at the trees again. I was married in that other time. He stared at him. Married? I. Jane Westerling. That's what got me killed by the phrase. I don't understand. I was supposed to marry Roslyn Free. It's a long story. One I'd rather not think about. I'd go mad otherwise, thinking about what could have been. Then don't think about it, that is. Stay in the here and now. Father's alive. The others are coming. We have a war to fight. I wish I'd known about the others before. It would have changed everything. But then there's an odd thing. Robb rubbed his chin. There's one difference between this time and the other. What's that then? Walder. The guard who fences with Jory at times. What of him? Robb shifted a little, his face puzzled. I don't remember him like that. He was different. He lived in the stables and he was a simpleton. All he ever said was one word, Hodder. And that's what he was called. This was mad. What sort of a word or a name is Hodder? I don't know. It must mean something. He thought it over. And that's the only difference. I overheard him talking to Jory the other day about horses. He knows a lot about horses, Walder does. Odd though. They brought me back, so why change that one thing? Jon stood. Something to think on. Now we have to get ready. I am bloody ready, Robb said with a sigh as he stood himself. My saddlebags are ready. Are yours? Aye. So who are we waiting for? Father needs to say his goodbyes. Tyrion. He looked at the book on the table worriedly. It's the only one of its kind. What if I drop it in a puddle? Or trip and drop it off the wall? I'd advise against it doing either, Daisy Sherestone said in a voice that was almost as dry as the sands of dawn. Just read it. I have all of Father's notes and also his rough draft of it, anyway, just in case you do fall off the wall or disappear in the night fort. He peered at her. How touching. Just bring it back. Tyrion nodded and then looked at the other books. These three, I think. Not a bad collection. There was a short silence. At least you're dressed properly for this trip. How long do you think you will be? I thought a month at least. However, when I asked Great John Umber, he laughed a lot and said, when Ned's in a hurry he travels like shit through a goose. Not a metaphor I like the sound of. But with the staging posts, and the boats at the Long Lake and the repairs to the road, well, I have no doubt that I at least will arrive at Castle Black as one huge saddle sore. Old Nan gave me some ointment for you. She passed over a small stone jar. He peered at it somewhat dubiously. I suspect that I'll need a barrel of it. But thank you. He paused for a moment. All of a sudden he seemed to feel the need to fill the air with witty banter, but for some reason all the words he wanted to use failed to assemble themselves in his head. Just before he opened his mouth again he heard the sound of hurried footsteps, and they both looked around to see Arya Stark bolt into the room and look around wildly. "What's wrong, Arya?" Daisy asked with an odd tone in her voice. "Daisy. Father needs to see you at once. I heard him say so. And I need to say goodbye to Robb and John. And Septum Ordain wants me to be ladylike and I can't, so, wait, where's Nymeria? Oh. There she is." And then she ran out again. Tyrion and Daisy stared at the doorway for a long moment, and then she looked back at Tyrion and sighed. "I'm told that cousin Lyanna was just like that. Impulsive is too dull a word to describe her. She likes you a lot. She can't understand why I read so much though." She sighed and then stood. "I need to find Ned. I suppose that he'll be outside. I wish that was coming with you. With you all I mean. The Night Fort. What a chance to record and study the place." He gathered up his books, placed them in the backpack that he had bought especially for the trip, and then got down off the chair. "I still wish I knew why I was going." "Truly knew. You have been summoned, Tyrion," she chided him lightly as she strode along next to him down the corridor. "Summoned by the old gods themselves?" He finally asked. Was she worth it? They found Lord Stark in the courtyard, in full riding garb and talking quietly to Lady Stark and their eldest son, as well as the former bastard. Theon Greyjoy was to one side in riding garb, looking very serious. He'd heard that the Greyjoy was coming with them as well. He still wondered why though. Brandon Stark was standing to one side looking mulish. The moment that Ned Stark saw Daisy he stiffened a little and then beckoned her over. Tyrion went with her, partly through incorrigible nosiness and partly because Aemon was standing to one side with the horses. The Westerlander was still in Winterfell, as Captain Harklin had sent word from father himself that Tyrion needed a retinue. Aemon was that retinue. "Daisy, my good brother, Edmure Tully, has sent a raven. Sir William Bootle has been found and arrested on suspicion of murdering your father and stealing your inheritance." She stopped dead in her tracks, the blood visibly draining from her face. "Truly?" "Truly," Lady Stark said with a small smile. "He was apprehended about 10 miles north of Seaguard. And he still had everything from Surestone." Daisy was shaking slightly now. "Everything?" "Everything," Lord Stark said with a grim nod. "You will have Surestone back, cousin. I swore it and it shall be so. He's coming back for questioning and trial. You are the heir to Surestone, not him." "There must always be a Surestone in Surestone," said a quiet, level voice to one side, and Tyrion looked over to see Roose Bolton standing there by his own horse. "Every lord of the north knows that. This Bootle will pay. I knew your father, Lady Surestone. A good man. I rumbled Great John Umber from the top of his large destrier. And he could hold his ale." Lord Stark nodded again and then looked at Daisy. "By the time we return he should be here. And you will have it all back, cousin. Lady Surestone." "Thank you, Ned," she whispered just loudly enough for Tyrion to hear. And then, more loudly, "You have my thanks, Lord Stark. Surestone thanks you." "Think nothing of it." Lord Stark looked around the courtyard. "In my absence, my son Brandon Stark will be the Stark in Winterfell. Something he will take very seriously. Now my lords. To horse. We ride to Castle Black." There was a great susurration as men mounted horses. As Tyrion mounted his own with the aid of Aemon he looked around. Lord Stark was embracing Lady Stark, whilst his family looked on with various looks of amusement, Robb Stark, Sansa Stark and Jon Stark, and revolted astonishment, Arya Stark and Brandon Stark. As he settled himself in his own specially designed saddle he felt a hand on his leg and looked over to see that Daisy was standing next to his horse. "Tyrion Lannister, you come back in one piece," she said in a low intent voice. "I will show you the library in Surestone one day." He took her hand in both of his. "Of that I have no doubt, my lady. And I shall return. I promise it." And then somewhere in front of them a horn blew and the small host of mounted men stared to ride towards the opening gates. He released her hand, took the reins and then urged his horse forwards. "Well, now. Time to see the wall. Jorah. The great harbour, of which White Harbour was named, was filled with shipping. Every kind of ship seemed to be there, from Dornish galleys to cogs from the Reach to some of the odder ships from Essos. He sighed as he leaned against the railing of the ship and looked at the wharf that it was now moored to. The company of the Rose had come home, and its homecoming looked to be deeply emotional already by the looks on the faces of people like his distant cousins, one of whom had tears trickling down her face. Feeling awkward, he looked away and back to the wharf. And then he sighed a little. There was a man on a horse staring at him. Staring at him as if he could not believe his eyes. He was a fat, bald man with a walrus moustache, and Jorah knew him at once because they had once fought side by side at Pike. Sir Willis Marndaly, the eldest son of Lord Marndaly. The big man dismounted laboriously and then strode onto the wharf. Jorah sighed and then turned to Lyra, who was looking about the harbour in wonder. "I have been recognized." She looked about slightly wildly, caught sight of the approaching Sir Willis and then scowled at him. "You fear him? He was my friend once. We served together against the Ironborn. I shall get the stone." She scurried off. He watched her go wistfully and then took a deep breath and moved to the gangway that led down to the wharf. As he approached the bottom, he saw that Sir Willis was standing there motionless, one hand on the pommel of his sword. A long moment passed and then the Marndaly finally spoke. "You're a lucky man, Sir Jorah Mormont." "A lucky man. How so?" "My father's not here at the moment. You know what he thinks about those who commit the kind of crime you did." He shivered a little. "Oh yes, he knew. Sir Willis. That was your first bit of luck. My father sailed for Eastwatch by the sea 4 days ago, leaving me in charge. He's off to Castle Black, at a meeting of all the Lords of the North, as summoned by Lord Stark." Jorah's skin crawled for a long moment. The Lords of the North were converging on Castle Black. Then something occurred to him. My first bit of luck. What was my second? The big man in front of him harumphed for a moment. Then he looked him in the eye. "A raven came from King's Landing this morning. A fast one by the look of it. It had a message from the king. Sir Jorah Mormont has been pardoned, his exile is ended. Just in time to greet you. Otherwise I'd have you dragged off to a cell by now. Sir Jorah Mormont has been very helpful to the Company of the Rose, and is under my protection," said a voice behind Jorah, and he turned to see Edric Stark and Lyra walking towards them both. "But you say that he has been pardoned?" "He has." "The Company of the Rose, you say? And who are you?" "I was once the Stone, the leader of the Company of the Rose. The company is about disperse back to its families. And I am Edric Stark." The look that Willis Marndaly sent at Edric Stark combined utter astonishment with no small amount of shock. "Edric Stark? Are you a relative of Lord Stark?" "He is my cousin. Many times removed." The eldest son of Lord Marndaly did an excellent impression of a fish for a long moment, before rallying. "I think that some ravens must fly today. To Castle Black and Winterfell. I think that many ravens must fly. I need to send one to Winterfell myself, to tell of our return formally. The Starks had a hand in the creation of the Company of the Rose, and that is all I can say at this point. In addition, there are scions of most of the main great houses of the North, along with some that died out here in the North. They will need to plead their cases to the Stark in Winterfell. Oh, and then there are Marndalis amongst us." Sir Willis gaped at him again. "Say what again?" Edric Stark looked about the growing crowd behind him and then pointed to a stout man about 10 years younger than Sir Willis, who had a small flock of family around him. "Gardrick Marndaly." The younger Marndaly stepped forwards and bowed formally. "Greetings, cousin, and well met." After a moment Sir Willis rallied and bowed back, before stepping forwards and clasping forearms with his cousin. "Well met indeed. This is a day of unexpected joy. Welcome home, cousin. Welcome home to your family too." He looked around. "Welcome back to you all," he shouted. "Welcome back to the North. Your exile is over." And the shout of joy that arose from the people assembled there seemed to Jorah to shake the sky itself. But he still noticed as Lyra slipped her hand into his and squeezed it, before whispering into his ear, "Welcome home, my love. Welcome home." Chapter 18. Chapter text. Jon Arryn. Stannis Baratheon, much to his surprise, was a curiously solicitous guest for a man still recovering from a terrible wound. He sat next to his bed and was quiet and thoughtful and didn't raise his voice and boom encouragingly at him in an effort to raise his spirits. Robert had done that the last time that he's been ill. It had taken hours for his ears to stop ringing. Instead Stannis had come, to inform him about what had been done in the name of the realm whilst he had been asleep. The first thing he'd told Stannis had been what had happened. "It was Lysa," he said in a voice that shook far too much for his liking. "It was my wife, as I told Quill and the Maester. She attacked me with a knife. She was mouthing madness. Mentioned Baelish's name. She wanted me dead, kept telling me to die. Called me a horrible old man. I did my best to defend myself. Pulled my own knife. I think I got her in the arm. And then I fell. Last thing I remember is her kicking me in the head." He sat there for a long moment, his hands plucking at the sheet fitfully. He felt old and frail suddenly. "I did not know that the death of Baelish had sent her mad. I did not know. My own wife. You should not blame yourself. Madness is madness. And there are times when my own wife, well, I don't know what she is thinking. Even though I have spent more time recently with her than," and then oddly enough he turned slightly pink and coughed a little. Jon raised an eyebrow at him. "Are you well?" Stannis Baratheon stared at his hands intently for a moment. "It's nothing, really. Something that Baelish said, about it being no wonder that my wife has only given me one living child after only sleeping with her once a year. I realized that peculating traitor that he was, he might have been right about that one thing." He sighed. "At least you have that. Has there been any sign of my wife?" "None." He leant forwards a little. "Is the room secure?" He whispered the words. Stannis looked about and then nodded, before lowering his own voice. "Yes, but it would be wise to speak quietly. If you wish to speak of the great matter, well, it remains unresolved. You were wounded, and even though I had been made hand there was never time to tell Robert. He has met the boy at the blacksmith's. Met him and sent him to Storm's End." Stannis paused and then shook his head a little. "Something has changed within Robert. He is driving himself hard to become fit again. He thinks that there's a war coming. Something involving this call. He's been practicing with Stormbreaker. And walking around the practice yard with a log on his shoulders. It's as if 10 years have fallen off him. This was good, in a way. If Robert was throwing off that terrible slough of despondency that had taken him over in recent years. You have a plan then?" "I do. I shall be sailing for the north myself in 5 days," Stannis said grimly. "Sir Davos's son, Devan Seaworth, will captain my ship, a man almost as good as his father in sailing. I should have gone with Robert, but I do not like these reports of unrest in the Riverlands and Crownlands. There is talk of the Faith militant reappearing. And other talk of odd things in the places where weirwoods once grew. White saplings." Jon peered at him worriedly, before nodding slowly. "I need to contact the Vale and discover what has happened there as well. Which reminds me, your man Quill has a stack of messages for you. Are you up to it?" "I should be. There is much to be done. I do not think that there would be much objection if I brought in more guards for protection." Stannis looked at him. "More Baratheon guards as well, perhaps?" "Aye." "Good, then that is the first part of my plan. More men here in King's Landing, men to gain an advantage of any Lannister trickery. Cersei and her faithless brother will be isolated in the north. Between the men I'll bring and Lord Stark's men, we will have the advantage. Ned knows something. He sent me a letter some months ago warning me of Lannister plots. I know him better than you do. If it will help, I can give you a letter to show to him that will confirm what you tell him and secure his complete cooperation." There was the faint sound of teeth being ground together, and then Stannis nodded slowly. "Very well. You are right that I do not know Stark very well. Robert knows him best." Jon thought back to the angry argument that Ned and Robert had had on the day that Tywin Lannister had presented the latter with the blooded bodies of Rhaegar Targaryen's wife and children, before sighing. The two of them had been closer once. That day had driven a wedge into their friendship. Hopefully time had healed much. The great matter must be resolved. And then there is the matter of the call. I sense that it is just as important. And the realm kept together, which will be the hard part. I admit that. Before John could reply, the sound of shuffling feet pronounced the arrival of Pycelle, who beamed cheerfully at him. "Ah! Looking better already, my lord." "Yes.